Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 18 of the Day Zero podcast. I'm Spectre. With me is Z. Auntie decided to play hooky again, so it's just the two of us again with you guys today. So before we jump into topics, we do have a bit of a meta discussion before going into them. Z, you were saying you wanted to do a stream on Wednesday and Friday this week, because I remember.
Yeah, I was definitely considering doing a Wednesday stream. I'm not 100% sure that's going to happen. But because of kind of on Friday, I was going to be taking that stream, and then my ISP decided that instead of giving me my full speed, I should be restricted to just 1 megabit per second for the weekend. After they made that decision, it was kind of difficult to stream. So I seem to be back up now. Hopefully, this stream doesn't drop. But yeah, so I'd like to kind of make that up by doing a stream on Wednesday, looking at the PHP exploit we brought up a few episodes ago. But that may just be the Friday stream. I've kind of got two topics I want to look at, that and CodeQL, which we'll actually talk about later in this episode. So there may be a Wednesday stream. I don't want to promise it, but I would like to kind of have a makeup stream for missing that Friday one.
Okay, cool. So yeah, that's the main thing. It was just, for some of you, I know some of you were asking me actually on Discord about, was there going to be a stream on Friday? And yeah, it was just unfortunate that there was some internet issues there. So, but yeah, hopefully we should be back on track this week for that. All right, so let's talk about some Disney Plus accounts. So this was one link actually so we were going to talk about it, and then you were kind of iffy on talking about it, and I can definitely see why. And that's actually kind of what I wanted to talk about with this article. So for those of you that are just listening, it's the title of the article is "Thousands of Hacked Disney Plus Accounts Are Already for Sale on Hacking Forums." So Disney Plus just recently launched. I remember they had some issues when they first launched too. I remember like the service went down pretty quickly because of the traffic. But when you read a title like this, it sounds kind of like there was a breach or something like that. But that wasn't really the case. What
Yeah, in
happened was,
fairness, they
yeah,
do
go ahead.
have just hackers began hijacking accounts hours after. Like, in fairness, they do kind of roll that back. Like, the headline there is thousands of hacked Disney accounts, but they do roll that back a little bit in the little subtitle. To be fair.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people probably read this, and like they even link some tweets in the article, and it makes it seem like not even half of a week and it's already been hacked. Great Disney, or great security there, Disney. It's like, dude, it's not Disney's fault. It's your fault, because what's happening is, people are running uh leaked credentials and stuff like that, like dump databases against people's accounts, and they're cracking them. So it's an issue mainly of like password reuse, or just bad passwords in general. So it's not really Disney's fault. It's that's more on you to keep your, to not reuse passwords and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of the reason why I'd initially kind of wanted to pull this from talking about it, is because, like, this isn't Disney Plus being hacked.
But I do think
But you
it's
make a
worth
good
mentioning.
point, though, with, the way this has been presented. I definitely kind of saw this and initially added it thinking that, this was a Disney Plus compromise or something on their end.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like, I think we see this a lot, and we haven't really talked about it, but people often are quick to blame the company when their accounts get hacked, and they don't ever seem to think to look at themselves. So I think that's an important point. And
Yeah, I
I like to
mean,
hate Disney just as much as anyone else, but it's not really their fault in this case.
it definitely, this one is absolutely on the user for having any sort of password reuse. That's the type of person that's reusing their password. I don't know how much to expect from them either. And I mean, Disney's. So we don't really have details on how the campaign was run. If they did all of this out of, like, the same IP or something. I'm going to assume they didn't. I'm going to assume the attackers, like Disney, had at least something there. Um, Obviously, I don't know. I haven't, audited Disney to know what type of protections they have against that. Like, there are a few things Disney can do to make that more difficult, but I don't know if they have done it or not. So I don't want to, make the assertion there that, Disney was at fault for something when, I legitimately don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, password reuse is probably the biggest reason, people get hacked apart from, their friend just grabbing their computer and saying they hacked them. That's, right on par with that. Because both of those happen quite frequently. I'm sure you've seen people on Facebook posting about how, oh, they hacked their friend or whatever. But
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of kind of legitimately having an unexpected actor on your account, password reuse is the big one.
Yeah. So, I just wanted to call some people out on that. It's not always the company's fault if stuff happens.
Yeah,
But
no,
well,
the presentation of this was definitely terrible, and I'll also just kind of use it as a moment to mention, use the password manager.
yep.
It's because this is the big concern: reusing your password. You can have a strong, very secure password, but if it's been reused and it's been compromised somewhere, even if it's strong, even if it would otherwise be secure, when you reuse it, that's weakening the security of it quite a bit. So password manager kind of solves that. It introduces its own issues, but those issues are a lot harder to take advantage of than the issue of reusing the password or reusing kind of insecure variants of a password and something like that that can be predicted.
Yeah. All right. So faking an iVote decryption proof. So this article mainly goes into the NSW iVote system. So there were some flaws found in how they do the decryption.
Yeah, well, just one, well, kind of. So we actually talked about this system back in episode 2 with the Swiss vote.
Oh
It's from
wow.
the
Okay.
same. It's from Sictal, I think. I'm not sure if I'm saying the name correct. But same group basically made both of them.
I
And
didn't
what
pick up
ended
on
up
that.
happening is there's kind of a little bit of drama with it, where after the issues that we talked about back in episode 2, and there's a later issue that was during our break, that was also found. The NSW Election Commission, they came out saying, well, iVote isn't vulnerable to this for whatever reason. Turns out this paper kind of goes into the details of how, okay, so it's technically not vulnerable, but it's vulnerable to the exact same issue, which is slightly different here, slightly different values type thing.
Yeah, so I saw that it was actually discovered because they published some source code in July to try to prove it didn't contain any more bugs or something like that.
Yeah, well,
And
so
then
the
Vanessa
Election
Teague
Commission,
discovered that looked into the source code and found that there was a flaw still. So
yeah, so the Election Commission basically required that the source get released. And yeah, so the gist of this, of the issue here, is just that it's possible to kind of generate a vote that passes the proof step, but actually decrypts to, the wrong vote. It's kind of what I mean by that. If you're not familiar with electronic voting at all, uh, one of the points of it is to have ideally universal or universally, sorry, it's universal verifiability. Um, and that idea is just, everything can basically be compromised, but because of the math and the crypto being used, there are still guarantees of security, there are still guarantees of secrecy, things like that. So the iVote system here, that protocol doesn't try to offer that. It offers something called complete verifiability, which is just slightly weaker. It basically means you trust the server side components. And with that, this verifiability is when you go to vote, I'm not sure how this system exactly worked, but the idea is you would get like some sort of cryptographic hash that you can confirm or decrypts to your vote. That's the proof aspect. And then you'll have kind of later, it'll actually kind of be decrypted or operated on to count the votes and things like that. So you want to be able to know like your vote is actually decrypting to what you think it is because it's just a hash. It's not something that's really clear to you. And
yeah,
this is kind of because of the math. We've talked about this. I'm sure I went quite in depth. Actually, it was I think the last topic of episode 2. So if you kind of want to hear some in-depth stuff about kind of the electronic voting, homomorphic encryption, things like that, I'd recommend just listening back on that episode. But anyway, so this is basically they can generate a vote that passes that proof, that the proof step looks like it decrypts correctly, but when it actually goes through the system, it'll be a vote for somebody else. That's the gist of the issue here. The actual math involved is it doesn't look terrible, but it's beyond kind of what I want to spend time looking at.
yeah, fair enough. One thing that I saw mentioned outside of the white paper, actually by I think Vanessa Teague, was the kind of overall conclusion was just use paper voting. Like she had a list. It was like if you don't want to use paper voting, implement a proper proof system, and if you can't do that, go back to step one or something like that. It's kind of
Which is
kind of
fair.
a tongue-in-cheek thing.
I think it's immature to be using electronic voting on like significant votes right now. I've kind of
Absolutely.
been clear that I'm a fan of the electronic voting system. I do want to see this kind of come. I do think it's a good thing. Online voting's different aspect, like Swiss Vote, the one we talked about in episode 2, that also had internet voting. Whole nother topic, but electronic voting itself, where we actually have cryptographic reasons to believe in the security of the count or in the accuracy of the count. Anybody can go ahead and verify it. All of that. I think that's a positive step, but it's immature. We're not quite at the place where we should be using that on real votes yet. With Election Guard though, that was Election Guard SDK from Microsoft, kind of seeing an open source implementation of something that other companies can use. Like, I think getting to the point of auditing that, I don't think any of these should be closed source like this one tried to be. And I think still is. I think it's still partially proprietary. I think just part of the source code was released.
Yeah, I mean, part of my big issue with electronic voting is it's a very like involved threat model. Like you have to prevent tampering even at like the hardware level. You know what I mean? Like there's
Well, so that's where
I think
some
you
of the
need a bit too
crypto
much.
comes in, though. Where even if the voting machine itself is compromised, you should still have security in the votes. Like it shouldn't be possible to, like I said, with that whole proof stage. So the idea being, in an ideal situation, you kind of get your vote, you can get a proof, or like you can see what it would decrypt to. You can get another vote, see what it would decrypt to. Get another vote to it, and if they're all accurate, it gets increasingly more difficult for somebody to then take that vote and they're going to tamper with say 1 in 5, but 1 in 5 might just end up being one that gets verified and tossed away. Because in an ideal case, any vote that you actually do a proof on or that you get decrypted, you couldn't then actually use to vote with. Because that would kind of give an ability to prove who you voted for and sell your vote, which is an issue that they need to avoid. But if the math holds up, it should be possible to have a system where the machines can be compromised. And in fact, even with this one, it requires more of a server side compromise, not the voting machines themselves being compromised, if I understand correctly. This requires one of the trusted parts, which is kind of the real issue here with the whole iVote protocol, is that it doesn't have the universal verifiability, just that complete that I mentioned before. That means that server side can be compromised, and that is kind of the weak link here. You compromise that, you're able to compromise the election, whereas with universal verifiability, you don't get that same ability to tamper with the election, even if you compromise every component.
Yeah, I think like moving away from like some of the more technical issues like that. One thing I can see with electronic voting is even if like let's just say theoretically you created the system that was unbreakable, it's unhackable trademark. It was perfectly secure. It would be too easy for people to lose confidence in the integrity of the vote and of the election. Because especially with like the political climate and everything, you hear all the time about how the election was hacked. And even if you had a perfectly secure system, from people who don't know how the system works, there's going to be a lack of trust there for a long time, whereas pen and paper has decades of trust built behind it, right?
Yes and no. I mean, the thing about having the electronic vote is that those cryptographic hashes, they get published. So then, because of homomorphic encryption, anybody can go ahead and run and verify that the election results, all of those votes actually decrypt how they should to the appropriate, like that the counts are actually accurate. That's like anybody can do that. It's no longer a closed system. Anybody can count the votes. yeah, there are going to be people who don't understand how that works and stuff.
That's what I
I don't
mean.
understand
Right.
that, but because it is open, there's also going to be a lot more people who can be confident in how it works and who can be confident in the accuracy of those counts. And that, I think, is the big benefit that we get from that is, more accurate counts, electronic counting. So it's not just people counting the paper. And I get that people are going to be stuck in that for a while. I don't think we're should be using it super frequent, or sorry, in the near future. But because I do think it will take time to get that trust up there, but there are bigger reasons to trust the electronic vote count than the very kind of modifiable and usually inaccurate paper ballot.
I think we should just create AI and let them make all the decisions, to be honest. Let the AI
Given
make all the
our
decisions.
history of looking at AI, I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay, yeah, no, that was just a joke. So, all right, and we can talk a little bit about some, well, maybe not some AI, but some IoT. So there was this guy on Twitter, Lance Arvik, and he posted a tweet saying it has been a week, so I'm dropping a 0-day. The bed-facing Tapia robot deployed at the famous robot hotels in Japan can be converted to offer anyone remote camera and mic access to future guests. Vendor had 90 days, they didn't care. So this seemed really messed up to me, man. Like the fact that, like, assuming he's, telling, he's not overblowing what the issue was, like trying to overstate it. I can't believe that they didn't care about this, dude. Like, this is such a major privacy
I
issue
definitely
that.
could believe it. So I kind of wonder if this is related at all to what we talked just with the NFC beaming, like the Android beam or whatever it was that we talked about last episode.
Okay.
Just because like what he shows in the screenshot here is, just the fact that unknown source installation from unknown sources is enabled, and we know that you can install from NFC. We
Oh,
talked about
that's a
that
good
last
point.
week.
I
So
didn't
I
even
have a
think about
feeling that
that.
that's exactly what's going on here. Just, using that feature to go ahead and install whatever application you want right on this. So that includes malware.
Damn, Xeon some 200 IQ shit. I didn't even think about that. That's a good point. But
So, one thing on the timeline though,
okay.
while 90 days seems pretty clear, what's less clear is it also says it has been a week, so I'm dropping an O day. Vendor had 90 days.
I think that's a week after the 90 days. That's how I
That's
took it.
kind of what I was wondering, if it was a week after the 90 days or if they are just changed their mind and decide to say the vendor had 90 days, they actually had a week. Uh, but yeah, I mean, this is basically, you've got an Android or robot, you've got an Android. You've got a robot running Android that you can basically just install the malware on. Like that's the gist of this one. I'm assuming it's that same Android Beam or whatever from last episode. Although in that case, if that's true, then I think, it wouldn't even matter if unknown sources is enabled because Android Beam could install whatever it wanted to. That was the issue from that.
Yeah, so I mean, the one thing that comes out of this is like, why do we have to have IoT everywhere? Like,
Well, that's their thing is the hotel. They're, this robot hotel in Japan.
I
That's
don't know,
their
but I don't
thing.
know, man. I'd never stay at a hotel like that. That's it's just too early. It's like what you were saying with the electronic voting. I don't think like I don't see these kind like IoT.
Well, I
There's
don't know
people who
what.
do IoT security, and it's just a mess, right? Like,
Yeah, I don't know what feature they're actually supposed to be providing. Like, is this just like another TV that's an Android? Is this?
I'm guessing it's an assistant type thing. Like, I don't know.
Well, I mean,
It's
what
weird.
assistant do you need in your hotel room, though?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like that's why I'm not sure what the feature set is of this, and I didn't look. Probably should have. I mean, I definitely agree. Like, if the vendor didn't care, like that is a serious issue. The vendor didn't care, and yet is going to expand. Maybe they didn't care, they didn't respond, but they fixed it. Maybe that's the case, or maybe not.
Yeah. I do have one question I thought it'd be interesting to ask you. Do you think even if they didn't seem to care, they had 90 days, they didn't do anything, is this one of those cases where in this specific case you don't think you should have dropped it at all still? Just because of how like privacy invasive it is?
So that kind of comes down to my opinions on disclosure in general.
True, but I mean in this specific case I think it is more of a kind of outlier just because of how invasive it is, right? Like it's a lot more impactful, I think, than some other
If there
drops.
was evidence of it being used and like abused, like somebody was actually using this, then yeah, warning people about it, sure. Just dropping it as an ode, I'm less of a fan of. But I have to kind of state my opinion on the disclosure. I'm more for non-disclosure. Not, responsible or public disclosure. I kind of hold to non-disclosure, but the threat of public disclosure needs to be there. So people do still need to do the full disclosure. Uh, so it's kind of nuanced there. Like on one hand, I would say like for me, I just wouldn't publicly mention that unless there's an imminent reason to do so. It was actually being exploited or could knowably be exploited. But in this case, I could see the reasoning to do so. Getting kind of attention out there that it's there, that the vendor doesn't care, which is kind of another issue. Just mentioning that there's a serious privacy issue, and the vendor doesn't care. We reported 90 days ago, mentioning what it could do. Maybe not mentioning the unsigned code via NFC, like giving that information about it.
Okay.
And just to kind of touch Malgod, just asked a question about what do you think about disclosing a bug. Then the vendor mysteriously gets a report from another person before he submitted it. It depends on what case you're talking about. That happens in bug bounties all the time, and they're just duplicates. People kind of have the same spurt of inspiration and find the same thing. I mean, we're going to be talking about those MDS attacks again this episode.
Yeah.
With Zombie like there are like 3-4 universities that all found the same issue, independently disclosed it to Intel. And that's like a very kind of deep issue, and they all just kind of independently decide to start looking for that issue at that level. So and Malgok guy replies, it's so annoying. They're like, yeah, it's absolutely annoying. That's why I'm not. You have to be careful. I'm a fan of bug bounties. I don't personally participate in open bug bounties because of that duplication. And duplicates absolutely happen though, and like are legitimate. Companies get a lot of reports. So if you're testing something that either just came out and everybody's looking at it, to kind of get those easy pickings, you're probably going to find duplicates. It is a little bit more concerning when the issue seems more obscure and then they have like a report a day before you or something. That's definitely more suspicious, and I have seen some questionable cases. Could they lie? Absolutely. That said, word kind of gets around on certain companies being or claiming things like when it feels suspicious, people do talk about it. There are a few companies I've heard to avoid because they tend to mark things as duplicates. Maybe it's completely legitimate on their part. There's no real way for us to know, but could they lie? Absolutely. And I do think some companies will lie to avoid doing some payouts. There's a bit of pressure nowadays to have a bug bounty, and I feel like there are some companies that just aren't kind of in the security posture to actually have a bug bounty, because a bug bounty is something that should be offered once they have a reasonably mature security process in place.
So sorry, were you saying there that you think that like there's companies that are putting out bounties that don't necessarily want to, and that's the kind of
I think so for sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. What about me? I don't know. I mean, I've never had the issue happen personally, but collision is quite common. Like even you look at the pwn to own stuff we covered last episode. There were a few teams that were hitting like I think a router or something like that, and there was even collision just in that small event. So I don't think it's too uncommon. That being said, just like Z, I absolutely think that there are some companies that probably lie about it. Say they already knew about the issue so they can avoid paying out. And then once you submit that issue, it's kind of, it's not something you can really retract. and they already know about it. They're going to fix it. So it's kind of a touchy thing. But I do think in time, those kind of companies are usually ousted. Just because, if one person's like, oh, I reported something and they said they already knew about it, and that's happened to me quite a few times. Like, it's one of those things where I don't think they could do it too often, or it'd be caught too quickly. You know what I mean? If you submit a lot of reports and all of them are being shut down by already knowing about it, or some people to submit to that bounty and they get the same thing, that the suspicion kind of starts to rise, and I think that that would quickly destroy the reputation of that bounty.
Yeah, and adding on to that, you do have programs like HackerOne and stuff like that, where HackerOne can see that happening, can see like, hey, there wasn't actually a report, and like there's a bit of a third party there that helps to protect you. So there is that case too. Like a lot of bug bounties are coming out under HackerOne, and my understanding is HackerOne can kind of see when that's happening a bit. Obviously they the companies can add their own reports at any time or anything. Like it's not necessarily internal, but they can see it happening frequently.
Okay. The question about Pwn to Own, since I did just talk about it. So the question is, is Pwn to Own a conference where people get together to disclose vulnerabilities publicly they found, or is it a CTF? It's kind of a mix of both, actually. Generally, find
Pwn to Own is the CTF. PACSEC was the actual conference that people got together at.
Oh yeah, it's a good point. But what I mean is, like, Pwn to Own is you discover the bugs beforehand. You don't discover the bugs at the CTF. So Pwn to Own puts out the categories that they'll be accepting things for the event, and then you make submissions. You don't submit the bug details or anything, but I'm not. You know what? I don't want to say too much on that, just because I've never submitted anything to Pwn to Own, so I'm a bit like blurry on exactly what you need to provide and how much.
Yeah, so I haven't either. I believe though, I know they made some changes in terms of their offerings, I think a couple years ago. That said, like, you do need to offer some details about how it's happening, because you only get your time slot if it's like a unique vulnerability that's not the same as another vulnerability that you've submitted.
Yeah, so I mean, basically you come into the CTF, the Pwn to Own, with your bugs, and you try to exploit them, and the vendors are there on site. So if you succeed in exploiting it, then you get the payout, and the vendors can talk to you about how to fix the issue and stuff like that. The big thing with Pwn to Own, though, is like generally like the day before it happens, a lot of vendors will push out like immediate patches and stuff to try to avoid or try to screw over the teams at Pwn to Own a little bit. So but yeah, generally it's a CTF, and you just bring your bugs to it. It's kind of like a 0-day real world CTF in a way.
Yes, so they do gather. Malgot kind of responds. It sounds like it gathers data on different exploit techniques. So this is run by Zero Day Initiative, ZDI. I think they're owned by Trend Micro. So what their business model, what they do is they buy O-Days up. So, you find a random O-Day, you can sell it over to CDI. They don't pay the greatest, but what they do is they buy the O-Days, and then they publish an advisory out to all of their clients, and then after some time has passed, they give it over to the vendor. They say, hey, here's the vulnerability. Or I believe the vendors can also buy. They might have something like a first pick or first right access that vendors can subscribe to. I have no idea on that side. I know some other similar companies will offer that sort of service too. But that's the gist of it. They do buy the exploits and ultimately end up giving them over to the vendors. So Pwn to Own just a continuation of that. You bring your O-Days, they have certain things and they pay you out kind of immediately. They have some vendors on site immediately to ask questions about the vulnerability and things like that. But I mean, yeah, it is in a sense about different exploit techniques. Like they are gathering data on it, but that is their business model year round.
Yeah, and I mean, focusing specifically on the exploit techniques, I think if you do have like a unique technique that evades certain mitigations, they will actually pay for techniques too, not just exploits. But it's like kind of a rare instance. So, I thought I'd mention that since you were talking about exploit techniques. You mentioned that in the question. Okay, so we'll go on to our next topic, which is Facebook. So talking about bugs,
Facebook, WhatsApp, yeah.
WhatsApp, yeah. So Facebook is, it's obviously posted on Facebook. So there was a stack-based buffer overflow in WhatsApp through an MP4, and I've got to say, dude, I don't know what it is with WhatsApp and file parsing. They're having some issues over there, man.
Well, I mean, file parsing is a hard problem. So I don't want to, toss any shade at them for it. Like, most file parsers have some issues somewhere in them. So this one, it's a buffer overflow in kind of the elementary stream meta. So that's like the core wrapper, or sorry, you've got like the MP4 wrapper, and then inside that it wraps the elementary stream itself and the metadata there. So it's a buffer overflow in there. There is actually a proof of concept out for this, but there isn't a ton of useful information out of it. There is the GitHub here that has a POC for it, poc.mp4. It is literally just the binary there, so you'd have to kind of reverse engineer the exploit yourself. The C, I believe, is just kind of the library that they end up injecting. It's nothing useful for the actual exploit. I think it's the SO there. Yeah, I wanted to mention that it's there, though. Like, there is a little bit of information about it.
I don't know much about MP4, but could be interesting to look at. Might look at it on a stream or something. Not saying for sure, but it could be one of those fun ones to look at. Try to RE
might
how
be
it works.
fun, might be annoying.
Yeah,
I mean, it does say it's just a buffer overflow, which is maybe a bit nicer than, like, I think the last one we talked about was a double free.
Yeah, the one in the GIF parsing. So that was actually in episode 12. So for those of you that are new to the show or anything like that, we actually talked about WhatsApp before having a file parsing issue. In episode 12, they had a double free and how they parsed GIF files. So, we move from GIF to MP4. We'll see what's next.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say was just like, why is it that WhatsApp and some other mobile apps are having issues with file parsing, but file parsing bugs especially on the common files like this, are kind of dead everywhere else? So are they just
no, there's still like VLC still has vulnerabilities coming out too.
Okay.
No, I
didn't know that.
File parsing issues are still reasonably frequent because it's a difficult thing. And different encodings come out that are somewhat new. I mean, H.26 whatever. I mean, isn't that old, especially in terms of being adopted. It's really only been maybe the last 5 years or whatever, which isn't necessarily that long.
Yeah, it just seemed like an issue that like you don't really hear too much about anymore. At least I don't.
So I think part of that thing. I think that's more because people have stopped, or maybe not, definitely not stopped, but people consume media differently now. YouTube, Spotify, you're not really downloading music and what are doing it over VLC or something. You're maybe using an app on your phone now, so that becomes the target.
That's a fair point.
But I do think a big part of it is just people have kind of moved away. They're not running VLC, Winamp, whatever anymore as frequently as they might have in the past. So it's less of a target now.
Yeah, it's a good point. That's something I didn't really think about. So one area that these types of attacks could hit, not this one specifically, but other programs that could have issues parsing MP4s and stuff like that, would be like torrents and stuff, right? I guess that'd be like the main kind of vector that people would get attacked from.
Oh, getting attacked from, yeah, torrents, and that's a big reason why you have verified releasers and stuff like that, or like knowing where it's coming from, knowing what scene group it comes from, things like that. It's because people do release malicious files. Sometimes it's just you take a popular thing and release a fake video, but malware has definitely been released that way too, and that would, I think, be a big way people kind of get that on their system. But you could do it in a legitimate file that gets shared. Like, yeah, I would say torrenting and just unknown sources of media is kind of the bigger deal. I suppose I believe there are some campaigns that will uh use apparent porn, getting somebody to, oh yeah, download this video of me or whatever. Uh Something like that I believe has been used in the past for, malware campaigns of this sort.
Okay.
Although there are kind of easier ways to go about that. I have heard about the exploits being used that way.
Okay. So I noticed, you know, you left a note saying that when you were looking into the WhatsApp stuff, you discovered this HHVM security update thing.
Yeah, so what had happened there is I just went through and looked, okay, well, what other CVs have come out here from Facebook? And we actually, if you just increment the CV number, you get the next Facebook one there. Because usually, they'll allocate the CV numbers in blocks. Not always, but sometimes they'll grab like a block from, so they'll have a bunch of Facebook things together. So like we have, incrementing by one, we get that double free and the GIF stuff. But going back, I think it was 30 or 29, whatever it is on, yeah, it was 30. Just wasn't there. And I just figured, well, okay, so who did get 30? And I couldn't find it anywhere but this hat, or what is the hip hop VM?
I have no idea. I
It's
didn't look into
it's
this
like
at all. So.
it's Facebook's PHP thing.
Oh,
Like
okay. Okay.
I'm familiar with it. Because I think the language itself gets called hack, but I think the VM is hip hop or something like that. Maybe I'm completely mistaken. That said, just for some context, it's basically their PHP VM. Better performance, slightly different. It is a different language at this point. But anyway, what I found were you basically have this security update October 28th from them about these CVs, and they have a bunch of CVs here, and not a single one of them actually has any information on it. Like if you open it, it's just this has been reserved.
Awesome.
And I mean, I'm not going to go through all of them, but every one of them is just reserved. There's no information about what these vulnerabilities were that were discovered, nearly a month ago, and nothing about them. So I'm kind of interested, especially since it mentions it's by running a new fuzzer over the code base that they found. These CVs, they just don't tell us what they are.
Interesting. Fuzzing. Okay. That wouldn't have been my guess of how they discovered those. Okay, cool. Yeah, so hopefully those CVEs get updated, but they might just kind of get lost and thrown into a void, never to be updated again.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems weird because they do say more information can be found in these CVs, and then CVs aren't even. Yeah, that's what seemed really weird to me. It would be one thing to just have reserved CVs. That's all the time. It's the fact that they publish it and didn't actually put out the CV.
Yeah. All right, so we have some antivirus stuff.
Yeah, we've actually got two here from the same group, the Safe Breach. And that's two. One with McAfee and the other with Symantec. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really similar issues with both of these too. Essentially, Symantec endpoint protection, what it does is it tries to load this DLL, dsparse.dll, and it loads it from the current working directory, which in the case of the Symantec endpoint protection ends up being the syswow64 folder slash WBEM. I'm not quite sure what that stands for, but it's in that WBEM folder where it tries to load the dsparse DLL. So it's not there. It's actually sitting in the syswow64 folder, but it doesn't look up. It just looks. It's not there. So what this attack essentially is they're just able to drop in that DLL with a little bit of effort, because Symantec does try to have some self-defense. It does try to prevent you from writing into its own directory. Like it'll filter those writes. It wasn't clear how they actually bypass that. It sounded like they were basically to drop it in there and then do a reboot to get it to load in the DLL. But that's the gist of it. It tried to load a DLL that wasn't actually there, so they just replaced it with their own DLL. And interestingly, the McAfee version of this issue, almost exactly the same, except it's trying to load WBM COMN DLL. I'm assuming WBM common from system32/WBEM. So it's that same thing there, except System 32 instead of syswow 64. It's a different deal, but like it seems like a similar component. Same issue. DLL
Interesting.
doesn't exist. Oh, there we go. Web-based enterprise management, according to Malgod.
Okay.
But still, like it's a very simple to understand issue. They replaced the DLL. And really, I believe they use the exact same wording when they talk about getting past the self-defense. In both of the articles, I believe they both kind of just use basically the exact same wording.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, it seems a lot of programs on Windows seem to have issues related to DLL loading.
Well, I mean,
Seems
you
to be a
have the
very hard
same
issue to
thing
get
on
right.
Linux with like SO files and stuff too. It's definitely not unheard of on Linux either.
Okay, fair
But
enough.
you do kind of have less enterprise software, things that are running with everybody. That kind of creates this attack surface on Linux like you do on Windows.
Yeah. So I guess the only thing I'll say about it is hopefully these are like one-off issues. Like, obviously, antiviruses are a pretty juicy target to hit, especially like, these ones are pretty popular, Symantec and McAfee. So, hopefully they're one-offs. Hopefully we don't see like a slew of other similar attacks on them, but I think you pretty
Oh,
much
I'm
covered
sure we
everything
will.
there.
I mean, this sort of thing in antivirus is super common. Um, yeah, this is seen pretty frequently.
Okay. I just saw the thing about Bluekeep in chat. Did we talk about that last week? I think we did, right?
No, I don't recall if it was last week or the week before. Either way, we have discussed Blue Cube. We did talk about kind of the first spread of it. So I'd recommend looking back. It's definitely within the last couple episodes.
Yeah. I think it was
My
last week,
records
but I
say
might be wrong.
episode 16, so 2 episodes ago.
Okay. All right. I must have. I'm bad with time sometimes, man. But yeah, our YouTube link is in the underneath the stream, so you can check that out, and it'll be in the 16th video according to Z.
Yeah, and the gist of it, in my opinion, they're underwhelming. I think that was kind of a lot of people there. Fairly underwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an issue. It can be wormed, but at least with the case that we've seen of it being wormed there, obviously it was so unstable, so platform specific that the actual spread was quite underwhelming. And I mean, it is on older systems and things like that. So to kind of give the summary there, I think underwhelming kind of sums it up.
All right. All right, so let's talk about some cool attacks. You were saying you found this attack interesting. So, for those listening, it's imperceptible adversarial attacks on tabular data. So, you were saying this was interesting because we were talking about the audio attacks last week, and you were saying you never really considered attacks against tabular data.
Yeah, that was kind of why I figured we could maybe talk about this bit. So this is just a theory video. This is just a theory paper. It
A
doesn't go
game
into
theory.
really any practical attacks. At least not yet, but it's kind of planting the seed of an attack. So yeah, as I kind of mentioned, I had not really thought about adversarial attacks on basically textual data. And to be clear, when they're saying tabular data, it's just a data that has tabs in it or whatever to separate data fields. It's not like imperceptible addition of like tabs and white space into the file to mess with AI. It's more like on a banking system, a loan application, might have questions like your salary, might have some seemingly unrelated things like I think the example they use is like number of pets. And more the idea is using those other fields to use kind of natural values in them, like how many pets you have. You don't have 3 billion pets, but to use natural values to kind of mess with the AI a little bit. Because these aren't usually explainable AI systems, they're just more black boxes. They could be using those other fields in ways that we don't realize. So this is basically just trying to take advantage of that and looking at taking advantage of that sort of thing and having the imperceptible adversarial attacks are in coming up with values that are believable to a human reading it. and that don't mess with the things that are going to be analyzed strictly. Like, nobody's really, or somebody's probably going to look if you say you have a salary of 500,000 a year, but they're not going to look that deeply if you say you have 3 or 4 pets, if that happens to make a difference. So messing with those kind of side values is more or less what this paper was covering. Those innocuous values.
Yeah, so I mean, what I thought was interesting was they mention, the big comparison being made here in this paper is comparing against a lot of the attacks we've talked about in the past. You were talking about the audio one, but another one they talk about is the images. That's the one they focus on mainly.
Well, the
So
images
the
are the more
adversarial
common
images.
thing.
Yeah. So what they were saying was like, one thing that's interesting about attacks on tabular data as opposed to those images is it's a bit harder to detect the adversarial samples, just because tabular data is less accessible and it's a bit harder to read generally. Whereas with images, anybody can look at a bunch of images and, it's quite easy to tell if there's something that doesn't seem like it should be there. If you see like a bee and it's saying it's a dog, that's it's pretty easy for someone to see that there's something wrong there. Whereas with tabular data, it's hard, it's less accessible. So it's harder to tell, it's harder to find the issues with it in regards to adversarial attacks. So like you said, they say it's very early on and they want to do more research on it. My big question though is, while it's cool and while I think it's nice that they're gonna try to do more research into it, how many systems are really using AI on tabular data like this? Just because like AI is very common when we're
Right
talking about like
now,
self-driving
not a
cars and home
lot.
automation, but yeah,
But I mean, that doesn't, like, they do bring up, though, the financial industry does use tabular data, and it wouldn't be surprising to see them adopt AI into that
I don't
to
know
use it.
though,
So I think it's more of a future thing, or maybe it is actively being used. I don't actually know a ton about like fintech or anything. So maybe it is actually being actively used. They do mention that though, and I think it's a fair point. Like, these files do exist that do need to be analyzed. Like, it does seem like an area that's kind of ripe for AI to step into if it is being manually done.
okay. So they're basically, it seems like they're trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit on it then. Like trying to
Yeah,
get ahead of it before
that's the
it's used
gist of
there.
it. Like I said, this is kind of a seed of an idea. There isn't much here. It's not practical at this point. Like, there's no attack presented in here. Well, there is an attack, but it's not like on a live system or something at this point. But it's the seed of an idea that I think somebody can run with, um, and find an application to it. I guess Austin was here as mentioning a real-time AI, which I'm assuming is reading kind of the incoming streams of events and stuff like that, which is actually a good point there when you kind of have the, oh, what is that? There's that one AWS product, Firehose, something like that. Giving a stream input, so that could be tabular data AI working on that. So yeah, that's actually a good point. Real time AI.
Okay. Yeah, so we have another paper. It segues pretty well into another thing that's people are trying to get a bit ahead of the curve on, because it's not, it's something that's coming in the future, and that's 5G. So 5G reasoners. So this paper was about security and privacy analysis framework for 5G cellular network protocol. So I
Yeah,
thought,
this is a tool, by the way. There's a paper,
yeah,
but it's a tool for doing this.
yeah. So I thought what was cool was we've talked about 5G a little bit in the past. I remember we brought up, I think it was a European Union article that was talking about investigating the security of setting up 5G networks.
Yeah, we did talk about that. I think we've talked about actually the issues this guy's found before, because he's found, I think, 11 issues in 5G before, but then want to do a more holistic look at 5G, which is where this project was kind of born out of. I
Okay.
believe that's what it was. It might have just been LTE. I don't remember for sure. I know this guy's also worked on LTE, but I believe he had a 5G publication before this.
Okay.
Or the main researcher there, the Syed Hussein.
Yeah. So some of these issues, they could be exploited to allow, like, real-time tracking of targets. spoofing like alerts. So I'm guessing, stuff like Amber Alerts, weather alerts, stuff like that, and even just disconnecting a 5G connecting phone from the network, kind of stealthily, or without the user knowing potentially.
Yeah, I mean, some of these issues though were things like the counter, either having a desynced counter, so like the counter being used with crypto or hashing. So AES counter mode, things like that. It also had things with messing with the sequence number or just having a null cipher installed. So that could also be where some of these attacks are coming from. Like, okay, you can do this because you have a null cipher installed now, when everybody's talking, and playing text or something.
Yeah.
So several of the findings are fairly low level, kind of protocol level stuff. Which is kind of a cool aspect about this tool, is just the fact it's a protocol analysis framework, kind of models the discipline and works kind of from there. So speaking just about the tool, I thought it was kind of interesting, kind of the level that it tries to operate at.
Yeah, one thing I found a bit worrying was they said that GSMA classified them as nil or low impact in practice. And they didn't really touch on that really. Let me go to the conclusion. I think it was there where they mentioned it. But yeah, they brought up these issues and they kind of just blew them off, apparently.
It does seem like some of these things require a fairly high level of access in order to actually pull them off against the tower or whatever. Now I have to be careful with saying too much about it because, in all honesty, I don't know much about kind of the cell networks. I haven't done any testing at this layer.
It's a pretty
It's a
specialized area, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a somewhat dense paper because it is kind of talking. I mean, here's just their nice little simple architecture, which actually isn't too bad. It's not a crazy architecture overview, but yeah, I don't know. So I can't really talk a lot about how accessible some of these attacks are, but a lot of these attacks did seem to be kind of lower level, like messing with the protocol layer messages, which would be difficult to do in practice. So
Okay.
the issues there, but it seemed like a lot of these might be somewhat difficult to pull off in practice against actual people, but at the same time, with my knowledge, it might be as simple as just if you're able to run your own 5G tower, like just getting that hardware yourself and man in the middling people. It could just be as simple as that to get that level of access. But there seems to be attacks against the 5G towers, like in the protocol level.
Yeah.
Just in how it handles, whatever incoming packet and things like that. So, they can desync the counter as the one example that I keep coming back to.
Okay.
Which I think is here, yeah, the NAS counter reset.
Okay. So, did you notice that these apparently these same researchers actually discovered issues in the Nexus and S8 baseband stuff? Did you see anything about that? I did want to go back and look. I actually forgot to. I was gonna right before the stream. I'm wondering if these researchers were in Pwn2Own, because I remember there was baseband attacks in Pwn2Own. I was wondering if it was referring to that, but I didn't know if you managed to.
I didn't look
that.
into it at all.
Okay, fair enough.
That said, if we go back to the 5G reasoner, it's like he does have a GitHub. Actually, I think I might have the link accessible here.
Okay.
Yeah, just taking a moment to find it.
Okay, fair enough.
There we go.
That's a very nice web page.
Yeah, for an academic web page, it's quite well done. It's WordPress though. Keep that in mind.
Oh, okay. Losing points. All right. But yeah, sorry. What were you pointing to there?
Oh, I was just looking here to see if it mentioned the Endpoint to own it all.
Oh,
Because
okay,
he
I see.
mentions reported vulnerabilities here. Yeah, it isn't. No, it doesn't make any mention of it, so
No, that's too
it's
bad.
possible, but don't know at
Okay.
this point.
Oh well, that's fine. Uh, but yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. All right, so fuzzing Qualcomm Trust Zone apps. So this might be this is one of the cooler topics for me, just because I've been looking a bit into Trust Zone lately. So for those of you that have caught my streams, I've been looking into Android lately, mostly in kernel level, not really in userland. But one, one issue I have on the Pixel I bought for doing security stuff is the bootloader is locked by Verizon, and what actually enforces that locked bootloader, like the boot chain as a whole, the reason it's trusted is because of Trust Zone. So I've been looking a little bit into trusted execution environments, so it's kind of cool that a topic came up about that. So for people who don't know too much about trusted execution environments, they basically run above kernel level. It's usually used in stuff like the boot chain to prevent non-persistent, or prevent persistent malware. So a lot of like the crypto stuff, that all happens in Trust Zone. So in ARM, you have a few exception levels. You have EL0, which is exception level 0 for userland, EL1 for kernel, and then trusted execution, you can basically have apps that run in those exception levels, but they're isolated from the untrusted world. And then the monitor runs in EL3, which is the highest exception level. So, I think we actually did a little bit of a shout out before to an article that talked about exploiting Qualcomm secure bootloader in, I think it was two or three episodes ago, somewhere around there. But it was mainly attacking like a boot. It wasn't really focusing on the trust zone portion of it. It was kind of after Trust Zone. But yeah, so these applets, they're closed source. They're highly customized by the vendor and the OEM. So this this basically talks about trying to bring the trusted app into the normal world, by faking what a secure world loader does and then fuzzing it. And I thought that was like a really novel thing. It's not something I really ever thought of trying to do, like bringing a secure world app into unsecure world to try to fuzz it.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's, I think, the big thing that this brings forward. It does talk a little bit about an actual CVE finding that they have. It actually
yeah,
doesn't touch on too much detail about what that finding was. Just, there is the CV. I actually tried looking it up. But yeah, I thought this was cool to bring up because of exactly what you're saying. I just basically want to emphasize that it is an interesting idea to basically to be able to get access to fuzzing um, these trusted executables, because there is a higher level of entry to getting access to those, and just by virtue of that, they're less looked at, less analyzed, and quite likely less secure.
yeah. So I mean, you know, they use AFL to fuzz the command handlers. So AFL is like, I'd say, the most popular fuzzing, framework probably.
Yeah, I think
Um,
at this point I'd agree. It's or some variation of AFL.
yeah, but yeah, that is the main thing of the article, is like tearing down that barrier of, you know, secure world's hard to deal with, right? Because of how high it is in the chain of trust. So bringing those apps down to test for security vulnerabilities, I think that might be able to be used for a lot of trying to fuzz a lot of projects that previously people didn't really want to look at just because of how hard it was to deal with. So, I think this is quite a novel approach, and I think people should, check it out, and I think it might be used practically in some situations. And the other
Well, I
thing
mean, they've
is,
had findings, so it's been used practically.
oh yeah, but I mean for other people
Oh,
outside of
I
what
know
they're
what you
doing.
mean. I'm just
Yeah, shout out to AFL plus plus. Um, but one thing I want to say is I think this was a very accessible write up. They, I already looked a little bit into trusted execution environments, so there may be a bit of a bias there, but I found it to be very even if you don't know much about Trust Zone or how it works, I think it's pretty accessible. It talks about it in kind of layman's terms before it goes into anything super technical.
Yeah, it's a good overview. I didn't have a lot of experience with it, still don't. But yeah, I had a pretty easy time kind of going through this and understanding what they were doing.
Yeah. So, even if you're not, super familiar with how, boot chains work and Trust Zone and stuff like that, it should still be accessible to you. So definitely check it out. So TPM, I did want to ask you something. Did we talked about a TPM last episode too, didn't we?
We have talked about TPMs before. I don't recall which episode it would have been on.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't going insane. Okay.
Although, in all fairness, my notes, I don't have TPM anywhere but this episode, but I just might not have used that shorthand. Because I think the last one we talked about might have been...
would it have been Titan? Was Titan TP? Was that?
Well...
I think.
Kind of. I mean, it could have come up with Titan. Anyway, TPM-Fail. Named vulnerability.
So I will mention, for those of you that don't know what TPM means, it's Trusted Platform Module. So just wanted to bring that up. Sorry, you can continue there.
And actually, I guess I can say, I know we've personally talked about TPM a few times before, so you might just be thinking about that too.
Maybe, yeah.
Anyway, TPM-Fail here. It's a nice named vulnerability. Got the nice domain. They don't have HTTPS on it, but I'll forgive him on that.
All right.
But basically, I won't say it was overhyped because this one didn't get hyped or anything. I mean, I saw linked out of it. But the real issue here is basically it's a timing attack. So essentially, you can leak the private key that you use for signing like digital signatures. Or that you use for creating those signatures. So you can spoof signatures with that key. That said, a lot of uses for TPM are in things like, your crypto keys, your like verifying hardware kind of locally, and this basically has no impact there. It doesn't change the security there at all. Being able to spoof the signatures, and by getting that private key, you're able to generate some that if you're sending it off to another thing. So, for example, these signatures could be used to authenticate your laptop onto, I believe they use the example of like a laptop authenticating onto a VPN, saying like, I'm this hardware, I'm this device, verifying that device itself. You'd be able to fake that signature, which is absolutely used, but it's less consumer and more enterprise level.
Okay. I mean, one thing I noticed is I think their like main thing they used to show it off was they demonstrated that it can be used to break 256-bit keys of ECDSA. But I think they said like it took about 5 hours or something like that to do it. But 256-bit is kind of small. Like, how does it scale up? You know what I mean? Like when you get to like 512 or 1024.
256-bit, yeah, like I said, it is fairly small for I think it's pretty small actually for ACDSA. I mean, I've kind of got, because it's public key still in my head, kind of the RSA numbers where you're like 2048 bits. I'm not sure what ECDSA usually looks at for size though.
I tried looking into it.
Like exactly what the size is there.
It does seem kind of small. I don't know if anyone in chat, does anyone remember how big the keys were for the PS3? Because I know the PS3 used ECDSA. I don't know if anybody might remember that, because I know we do have some console people in chat, so might be an interesting question to throw out there.
Oh no, so real Nano user, what does Nano use? Or are you going to tell me it doesn't have ECDSA built right into it?
It doesn't need ECDSA. But, yeah, I mean, I think 1024 is kind of the standard for ECDSA, but I might be wrong. So, if you're listening and you're an expert on that, don't crucify me. I'm not too familiar with ECDSA.
Yeah, I'm not sure on this, so I don't want to make any claim about whether or not that's a small size or not.
Yeah, but I just want to point that out. Like that might be a point of consideration for how practical the attack is. Um, I like it seems to be like a side
It
channel,
said,
right? It's a
did they break a signature? Because I mean, what they talk about is more leaking the private key. Are you sure it wasn't like 5 hours to leak the key?
It might have been, yeah, it might have been leak. Yeah, I
Yeah,
might be
because I mean,
misremember there.
breaking and leaking is definitely, I guess, different terminology. Ultimately, you're kind of getting the same thing. But
Nano's already secure. ECDSA is for insecure environments.
that's quoting our
Fair
chat
enough.
user, real nano user.
Yeah.
That's not Spectre's opinion. That's fact.
Yeah, that's fact. Exactly.
But yeah, so this issue though, my understanding is that you're basically able to leak that key. So yeah, they use it to show like they can leak that ECDSA key, but what you can do with that, I think, is really limited in terms of what the average consumer is. The risk to them seems fairly low because they're not having TPM generate those signatures. Um, like I said, enterprise area, like that's definitely used in terms to verify hardware and things like that. But at the consumer level, I don't believe it's really used that much. I did find it interesting though that it mentions the certifications, like being FIPS 140 certified at level 2, which in theory should have looked for this attack.
Sorry,
And
can you repeat that again for a sec? I'm trying to.
so the
I
one
didn't
section here, so
read
there are
that part.
certifications for these implementations. I mean, when they have the trust thing, they also want to hit like a certification saying they've been verified to be a secure implementation of something.
Okay.
So that's like the FIPS 140 is the example here. I think they also or mentions one of the chips there, the ST microelectronics TPM chip, is common criteria certified at EAL 4 plus. Um, and it mentions the FIPS 140 here, all of that. So I just thought it was interesting. Like it's kind of to be expected that when you get audited for that, they're looking for it. Auditors make mistakes. Sometimes things pass through. This just happened to also pass through and kind of be like it's something that should have been caught. This sort of timing attack.
Yeah. So I will say, unlike some of the previous white papers that we've covered, because there is a link to the white paper in this link, it's pretty dense, and if you're not like into crypto and how you know it, I'm just saying like it's higher to it's harder to understand than some of the papers we've covered already. I didn't like I'm It's a timing side channel, and I've always kind of found those attacks interesting, so I wanted to go into the white paper to look more into how it works, and I got lost. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah,
So
crypto maybe isn't the best place to look at timing attack or to start with timing attacks.
yeah.
Well, then
So
again, most timing attacks are actually against crypto systems, but this one in particular is a little bit more difficult. I will mention they are apparently going to release the code for this. They have not done so yet. They do have a GitHub that just has a README saying that the attack code will be posted soon. It's not there yet, but it's coming maybe, or maybe it'll be like the Facebook CVs.
just permanently empty. Yeah. All right. So staying in the low level world, we have mitigations for jump conditional code Erratum. So I actually came across this. I didn't come across this paper, the white paper from Intel, but I actually found it through a tweet that somebody posted, because there was a guy. His name is Damage Boy. I gotta get the tweet up. Let me just get it really
I've
quick,
got
because
it
I think
here.
that'll. Oh, you have it? Okay,
Yep.
awesome. So basically, he was writing his own implementation for array.sort. So he's been comparing benchmarks with C Sharp's array.sort algorithm, and he noticed after a recent microcode patch that Intel pushed, C Sharp's array.sort is about 20% slower. He said his runs at about the same. It's impacted a little bit, but C Sharp's got hit really hard. So he kind of went investigating to see what triggered that, performance loss, and he found that microcode update. So this microcode update, apparently it affects like pretty much every jump, not just conditional jumps. The paper says that it affects direct unconditional jumps, indirect jumps, calls, even returns.
It affects the jumps that cross a 32-bit boundary. And
A
the actual
32-byte boundary, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. That cross that, and the actual paper kind of goes into it a bit. Kind of showing the different boundary setups there where the jump or the different types of jumps might cross it. So yeah, I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, so he noted that JIT programs, so just in time, are probably going to suffer from this the most. They seem to have a lot of the jumps across 32-byte boundaries. So this seems to be another case of Intel just suffering for like design decisions they made a while ago in favor of performance, and now they have to implement security fixes.
Well, I
Because
don't think that's clear.
Well,
we don't know that this was a security thing, do we?
They do actually say that it was
about it.
Well, they say that they fixed it because it could cause undefined behavior. So
Undefined behavior, like it was a bug. It's Erratum, so there was a bug there. I mean, so I believe it was a security thing, but I don't think Intel has actually made that claim at all. Undefined behavior isn't necessarily an exploitable bug.
I mean, to be fair, yeah, I kind of made an assumption it was a security thing, because like
yeah, and that's why I wanted
probably
to
is.
talk about this one, because
Okay.
I don't see a good reason why Intel would bring in this sort of like significant performance hit, where their solution here is basically they just disable caching on those jumps.
Yeah.
Like just disable caching. That's their solution to this bug. They don't actually fix something, they just disable the caching. And that's why there's such a huge performance hit on, because you end up getting the cache miss, which obviously adds significant time to the execution of the operation. So it seems to me like if they're going to do this and they're going to bring in this, they've got to have a good reason for it. My suspicion, just because we've been seeing all of this speculation stuff, and we actually skipped over the speculation topic, but we'll get to it next, instead of covering it before this, but we did just have more of the MDS attack stuff come out in Zombie Low 2.0, in the TSX asynchronous stuff, or in the TSX transactions, I should say. Actually, TSX probably stands for transaction. Either way, because of that, I have a feeling like maybe there's some speculation on this cache, but Intel discovered it and not any of these universities. And therefore, Intel's kind of just gotten ahead, patched it before it becomes a named vulnerability. And that's kind of my suspicion here. Obviously, I don't know that. I cannot back that up. But that's kind of what I suspect, is that there's probably some speculation issue here with this cache.
Yeah, so I mean, the big thing we're talking about here and what actually allowed me to find out about this issue was the performance hit. So if you go to page 7, what's interesting is they say Intel has observed performance effects from the workaround ranging from 0 to 4% on many industry standard benchmarks. And, obviously I don't think they go into too much detail on, which benchmarks they use, but it seems very out of touch with what some other people are reporting. Like they're saying 0 to 4%. That guy said with array.sort it was 20%, and somebody actually put out a chart of web platforms, web browser performance benchmarks, and they were like 0 to 21%. So I don't know what benchmarks they were doing, but apparently they weren't very good, because it seems the performance impact is a lot harder than they actually
yeah, I mean, they can choose their benchmarks to look better, though.
They probably did, honestly.
Yeah, that's most likely what happened, is they choose the benchmarks that look best. I don't think they even mention what the benchmarks are, so...
Yeah, exactly. Cherry-picked.
Yep.
Goddamn Intel. All right, so...
yeah, I guess I will say, that is speculation, though, about it being a security issue, but I do strongly believe that that is the case, because I don't see a good reason for Intel to introduce such a performance hit if they didn't believe it was necessary.
Yeah. So talking about low-level stuff, you were mentioning MDS, the microarchitectural data sampling. So this was put out as well.
Yeah, so we talked about this back in episode 10.
Yeah, so
So
they're
Austin,
saying
we weren't
basically,
asking for the full key. We were just asking about the size of the key being used for ECDSA.
yeah. I hope Sony doesn't come and DMC Airstream now. No, I think they've moved past that. But no, so for the MDS attacks, I was a bit confused because they said that it was issues that Intel said they fixed 6 months ago or whatever it was, but they didn't fix it. So it seems to be kind of calling out Intel for like
Absolutely.
lying about it.
There's that aspect of it. So there is that aspect where Intel, fixed all of these, or not fixed all of them. There was this TAA issue. So basically, to kind of give an update here, we talked about the MDS attacks and zombie load back on episode 10. So if you kind of want some detail on it, we do go into a reasonable degree of detail during episode 10. This update is basically adding that they can do speculation on this TSX, which is atomic memory transactions. They basically either get committed or they get aborted. So an asynchronous abort ends up having the speculative execution. It kind of keeps going even after the thing's been aborted, allowing for some cache information to be leaked, or allowing for information to be read out of like the store buffers. The same stuff that Riddle was going after, because this was a continuation on the Riddle attack.
Okay.
So that's the very high level gist of it. You can look at the paper if you want more, or listen to episode 10 kind of for the gist of the root of these attacks itself. But one of the big issues here is there are companies that would have updated their hardware following this, or at some point followed. Maybe it was just their cycle lined up nicely, and Intel was saying they had fixed these issues. And what they just had this TAA one hidden, and this is Zombie Load 2.0, if you've heard that term. It's basically the issue in TSX. It's two different universities. Looks like it's the same issue, though, from both of them. They both want their named attack.
So I did see some people that were kind of, I guess, getting a little bit tired of these issues that keep coming up with these speculative execution attacks, just because practically pulling them off is just not really possible in many cases, especially because, for those of you that don't know, shortly after the speculative execution attacks started to become big news and stuff, the one probably important vector that could be used to exploit them was JavaScript through browsers. And as soon as those attacks went public, they basically made it so that the instrumentation that you would use to get the timing to pull off these attacks was way less accurate. So it just wasn't really possible to pull these attacks off from the browser anymore.
We have talked about some cases where they've instrumented their own timer, which has been accurate enough to use.
Okay.
So there have been workarounds on that. You are right. The biggest concern has been the browser doing it, or like row coding your browser using this to export information. But it's not completely eliminated. There have been methods to try and get timing out of it that have since been patched, that we know of. After they've been announced, they've usually been patched before that. But there have been some workarounds, so it's not completely gone.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I kind of wanted to ask what you thought about, like, do you think that they're kind of trying to milk a lot of the research they've already done, trying to keep it relevant? Like, do you think some of those people that are kind of sick of these attacks are kind of
I mean, has it always
right
I don't think
like
it's
that?
always been the same group that's been finding different speculation things. I mean, this one in particular, MDS Attacks, like, they reported this at the same time as they reported their initial issues.
But that's what I mean, like, to keep bringing it up, do you think like this is
But they're only bringing it up because the embargo on it is up. they didn't choose not to disclose this earlier. Intel kept them from doing so.
Okay, fair
They
enough.
reported this a long time ago. They were ready to go with it back when everything was reported there. Intel just apparently just missed their report, missed their proof of concept of this, and never touched it. So a couple days before the other thing the old report went live, they decided to embargo this one until now.
Okay. So we got a question from chat. Real Nano User has no one used this just to bypass KSLR for a standard exploit. There was, I remember, not in this one, I don't think, but I remember some of the earlier speculative execution attacks. There were actually proof of concepts that did involve leaking kernel data that included pointers and stuff like that. I just think that because of how practically or impractical it is to pull off these attacks a lot of the time, it's easier to just go with like an info leak or something like that to defeat KSLR. Like I think it's just easier to do it through software than it is to do it through like a speculative execution side channel. So I know there was a proof that used it to defeat KSLR, but I don't think it was ever really used in any exploits or anything because of how difficult it was to use compared to just using an info leak or some other bug to do it. But yeah, I just wanted to address that. Was there anything else you wanted to add on the MDS stuff?
No, nothing really to add there. I'll just again kind of restate a bit of outrage there with Intel basically selling processors claiming that they fixed this but not having actually patched all of the issues reported. I mean, that is very much a jerk move from Intel to do that, especially if companies are upgrading to avoid it. It's, oh, you get to upgrade again. Especially with AMD starting to do well, or starting to have CPUs that can compete with like the Xeons.
Mm-hmm.
This is hurting Intel's reputation for sure.
Yeah, AMD starting. I think even a couple years ago, people were starting to say like AMD looks like it's going to start taking ground, and
well,
looks
when
like it is.
the first Ryzen kind of came out around that time, is obviously where people started paying more attention to AMD and started competing again in there. And so I don't know. I mean, I see this, and if I were, buying out for a data center, I'd start having some real questions about Intel. I mean, obviously, just having the issues themselves are one thing, but then the fact that they didn't disclose the issue, sold things saying that they were patched, I would have some real concern. Like, I would have some real trust issues with Intel by this point.
Okay. All right, so we'll end that off there. So we did have a bit of a last minute addition. So the Tianfu Cup, I think I said that right. I don't know if I did though. Feel free to connect me.
I don't know. I'm going to guess that
but,
has more of a Chinese sounding thing. Go ahead.
But yeah, I was just gonna say we were talking a little bit about Pwn to Own earlier, and when we were talking about Pwn to Own on the podcast, we were saying that, or at least I was saying that I felt like the event kind of lost a little bit of interest from some people because a lot of the Chinese teams, well, actually all of the Chinese teams aren't allowed to compete at exploit competitions anymore outside of China. So where they are competing now is at events like this, the Tianfu Cup. Because this is an event in China, so it had a lot of those teams that used to attend Pwn to Own and stuff like that. So yeah, I know you linked it a little bit before. I didn't get a chance to look too much at it. The one thing though is because it is in China, pretty much everything is in Chinese. So the schedule you can translate, but a lot of the results they have images, and we can't really translate those very easily unless we use like.
I mean, you can kind of figure out, obviously 360 Vulcan, I'm assuming is the team name. And you can see at the base there that this 360 security team got, it looks like 620,000. It has a dollar sign there. I'm not sure if that's actually dollars or if that's like 620,000 their local currency.
Yeah, because China, I think it's yen, right? So
yeah, but they do have the dollar sign there. I'm not sure what yen.
Okay.
I'm not sure what their symbol looks like, but Although it does say, I mean, that definitely could be an actual amount there,
Yeah.
but we don't have a ton of information. There are some news reports that seem to indicate a number of O days were dropped during this. But just looking from their page, we really can't pull that out.
Yeah. So basically what we're saying is anybody who knows Chinese and wants to come on the stream and translate it for us, we'd be very appreciative. No. But yeah, I mean, it was just something we kind of wanted to mention, just because we did mention the fact that Chinese teams weren't attending Pwn to Own. So
yeah, it is nice to see that they've
into
got something there. I mean, ignoring any thoughts on China, it is nice that at least when they kicked them out from Pwn to Own or prevented them from doing that, they've offered at least some alternative that maybe benefits them a little bit more. But yeah, actually, I don't know if they disclose to the vendors or not. That would actually make a big difference here. And of course,
I would imagine they do. I would think. I don't know. That's a good question, though. I think that's something we might want to look into and do like a quick address of on the next podcast, because that would be if they don't disclose to vendors, I think that's pretty important. We gather information to be superior cyber gods. Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, I just noticed they have Office 365 Pro Plus as one of their targets. I'm just looking at the rules.
Oh yeah. Why are those in English, or did you translate that?
Well, they do have the English option up in the corner.
Oh,
but that doesn't translate everything. Like, I'm currently on English, and you can see that this is not English.
Maybe it's just English you haven't learned yet.
But yeah, it looks like they have some overlap. I think this TP link was something similar that was done.
Yeah.
Pwn to Own.
Pwn to Own. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can see some of their targets, like they are more like a lot more interesting. You know, you have iPhone, VMware, Safari, Chrome. You know, a lot more. Like at Pwn to Own, most of the stuff that was hit was like TVs and routers and
although
more IoT stuff.
I believe the VMware was still part of it in Pwn to Own. It just wasn't hit.
That's what I mean. Like there were some cool targets in Pwn to Own, but most of them weren't touched at all. There were no exploits for them. Most of the teams focused on IoT.
Well, so I don't know if these were touched though. This is just the rules.
True, but I mean, considering the payout amounts and stuff, and some of the stuff I've heard around the event, I'm pretty sure a lot of those were hit. I think there were some browser O-days and stuff like that.
There were some browser ones for sure. I definitely heard about that.
Yeah. But yeah, we can't talk too much about that just because of the Chinese stuff. It's a bit of a barrier for us, unfortunately. So mitigations. So I was kind of scared about this. So Google announced that they were implementing a shadow stack to protect against code reuse.
So they've already done so. This is actually this was actually in October. We just kind of missed this back then, and I thought it was relevant to bring up. Just because we were talking about the shadow call stack last episode, and we were talking about adoption of it and some of our thoughts about that, and what was it? Validate, like pointer or whatever, pointer authentication. Yeah, we were talking about that and kind of its applicability here versus the shadow stack. Turns out Android 9 actually introduced both CFI and and this year they added the shadow call stack, which looks like it's enabled in Android 10.
Yeah, they do have some back patches for 4.14 and 4.19, and for upstream Linux kernels. So I will be honest, when I initially read this, I was a little bit scared because I like doing kernel exploitation. Obviously, I remember like we did the stream, right? That was hitting the Android kernel, so this would affect what we were doing there. Actually, not necessarily with that exploit specifically, but generally. I mean, what this really protects against is stack overflows and stuff like that. Like corrupting the return address on the stack in some sort of way, because it checks and uses the shadow stack one. You can't just overwrite a return address on the stack and return to it. So
just to touch on there with Malgod, with JOP, you should be okay. Like there are attacks, like shadow stack does not eliminate all exploit development.
No.
It's a step in that. It does make things a little bit more difficult. It does eliminate some of our options when you are writing those exploits. But as you point out, like with JOP, I don't believe, at least in most cases, Shadow Stack isn't going to be much of an issue.
So one thing, like they mentioned code reuse, and when you think about code reuse, you think about things like return-oriented programming, which they actually mentioned directly. One thing I didn't see, maybe you did, I don't see them addressing how they actually prevent ROP using the shadow stack. Because like what happens
Well,
if you just
it does mention CFI earlier that they introduced control flow integrity also using Klang's like
okay,
forward
so
edge there.
maybe that's what they meant.
So I believe that's kind of what they're talking about.
Okay. But I mean, yeah, mainly this wasn't as big of a deal as I initially thought because it's mostly against stack overflows and with the CFI, maybe that's what protects against ROP and stuff like that. But stack overflows specifically, they're a pretty rare bug class. You already have stack cookies that are pretty good at protecting against that. Most functions that allow user input on the stack have stack cookies. This will protect the ones that don't, I guess. But assuming the CFI is what implements the ROP protection and not this actually isn't a huge mitigation, I don't think. Unless I'm, missing some information
Well,
on that.
so when you kind of do your ROP chain, though, you are kind of creating your own stack with its own returns. I mean, the ROP chain return-oriented programming, the shadow call stack is going to prevent your returns because
Will
it's
it?
not going to. Well, it's not going to match up because you can't modify the values on the shadow stack.
Okay, I see.
So, like, it's shadow call stack is a protection against ROP, just not JOP.
Okay, so I was thinking about like couldn't you just pivot the stack away from the shadow stack? But yeah, you're right. It
But
would
no, the
keep.
shadow stack's separate.
Yeah,
So you
so it
need
would
some way
keep
to
track of
modify.
it. Okay, I see what you mean now. Okay, makes sense. Okay, so I guess I've gone a little bit back and forth then. So I guess it is a little bit more important than I thought it was at first. But like you said, you can still get around it pretty easily with JOP. JOP, jump-oriented programming, for those of you who don't know, instead of using a fake call stack to call your own, like, use code reuse attacks, um, you use JOP. So instead of using calls, you use jumps to jump to registers you control, and then you just chain them together. It's a lot more of a pain in the ass to do, though. Um, but it looks like JOP maybe, within a year or two, it'll probably be what's left, all that's left, until the next thing comes along.
Perhaps. I mean, we've talked about co-op a little bit, which is for the C++ stuff. And it's basically just an issue with CFI not being able to handle like the virtual functions is essentially what it comes down to. But um, so that'll be another area that maybe will get a bit more popular.
Yeah. So one thing I will say is you don't necessarily need code execution directly in the kernel to be able to pop it, just because like if you can get an arbitrary read write, you can just patch your credentials to make yourself root, and then you can just load kernel modules anyway. So this will
But
protect
what
against
arb read
situation.
write are you having that isn't, by doing some sort of return or like ROP chain or something like that?
Well, I mean, if you had
I mean,
like a
there are
UAF
some,
on
but
an
there are.
object, if you had a UAF on an object that used a pointer and then you control the pointer, you could get an arbitrary read write, and
Fair.
this would do nothing for that.
Yeah, fair
So,
point.
so like arbitrary read write and stuff that doesn't rely on you having code execution, this won't really do much for. So it does hit some pretty specific exploit cases. So it's definitely not an end all be all
Yeah, but
mitigation.
common exploit cases.
Yeah, but there's even more. But there's more. There was another article put out about security things in Linux 5.3. So this is a little bit further off. Android kernels are pretty, I don't think they're even in the 5.x range yet. I think they're still in 4. So this is more, I guess, for updated, like even a lot of distros aren't on 5 yet. So this is probably something that's going to come in the pipeline for a lot of other things. There are some things that use Linux 5 .x, but I don't think a lot of things are using it yet. But one thing, there's a few things they've added here that are pretty scary. One thing, probably the scariest thing is the heap variable initialization. So they've added this config option. I don't know if it's enabled by default. They do say that everyone should enable it, but I don't. They don't really say if it's in the default config.
Yeah,
May have
all
to
it
look
says
into
there
that.
is it's he added that boot parameters with associated defaults. It doesn't actually make mention of it, but they do have some defaults. We can probably look into it or figure out if it is.
Yeah. So what this config option basically does is you can basically think of it as all the kmalloc calls, which is the kernel version of malloc, right? It allocates a heap pointer for you to use. It effectively turns them into kzalloc calls. And kzalloc, for those not familiar with the allocation API in the kernel, it's basically the same as malloc, but it zeroes the allocation after or before returning the pointer to you. So it implicitly zeroes the backing memory. And why this is important is this basically kills any heap uninitialized use bugs. So any info leaks that happen through like struct padding of structures that are allocated on the heap, this is going to kill all of them. This is going to kill a lot of bugs. It's going to be like a genocide. It's going to be kind of crazy. I think this one config option, it's going to do a lot, man. And one reason why this wasn't done in the past was performance, but they actually mention here the performance impact under most workloads appears to be under 1% if it's measurable at all. So if this config option works as they say, the performance impact is low, so there's no reason for anybody to disable it, and it ends up being in the default config. There's going to be pretty much an entire class of bugs that's going to die. So
Yeah, I mean it's because that's a big thing for information leaks is that uninitialized aspect, or as you said, like the padding in there and stuff. So I'm curious if the performance is actually going to be as low as it seems or as low as they say. I could believe it because I mean the thing is memory has gotten so much faster over the years. So I mean I would definitely believe it, but it'll be interesting to see if it does. I did find like the PID FD. I hadn't heard about this. Uh,
I
I
wasn't
did
too
find
sure
that
about that
was
one.
kind of
Yeah.
yeah. So I had to dig back a little bit to what was brought in with like 5.1 because there have been kind of incremental updates with 5.1 of introducing this whole PID FD and then moving up. And I guess basically the idea was previously for some interprocess communication, if you kind of open like the PID, you'd send signals off to the PID or whatever, send information off. Whereas with this, essentially you're opening up on a real nano users. Oh, that's not related to what we're talking about. Sorry. Um, I just saw him come up with no, and I think like, oh, I'm wrong here. And it's actually just that nano doesn't have bugs. Anyway, so PID FD. What it is it's an attempt to remove racing PIDs where you would have race conditions over the PID being grabbed. So you kill whatever process it's communicating with, and you try and get that PID. So now it's going to communicate with you, and you can do whatever you want with that. Whereas the PID FD, if the process closes or something, it won't just go to that PID again. It basically it's opening a file descriptor to a specific process, and it's locked to that process when it's opened. If the PID changes, if or if it closes or something, it won't just open up when another process gets that same PID back. So just killing races on that. So I thought that was just kind of an interesting one. Like I said, I hadn't heard of it. I haven't looked into it at all.
Yeah, I didn't really think about that case either. I haven't seen many exploits abuse that, but that could definitely be an issue. I could see why that would cause races.
Yeah, and then some of the other things brought in, there's warnings on implicit fall through. So that's when like you have a switch case and you do a case, but you don't put a break in it. It'll fall through into the next case, and the next case until it runs into the break. So this will warn when you run through cases, basically eliminating it, assuming they get rid of all the warnings, eliminating all cases of that.
Yeah.
The next thing, pinning the control register, the pinning some of the bits on that. So
this is another big one. It's probably
Yeah.
the second biggest one in here. So for people who haven't really done kernel exploits or done anything in kernel really at all, in x86 you have control registers. CR0, CR4 are the two biggest ones, and the reason is CR0 enforces the kernel write protection. If the write protection bit is set, you won't be able to scribble over kernel.txt. You'll get basically, I think it's enforced when the request goes through to the IOMMU or whatever. It'll just ignore the request. It won't let you do the write. And then CR4 has the bits responsible for enabling secure supervisor mode access prevention and supervisor mode execution prevention. So these things basically prevent kernel from accessing userland memory as if it were kernel memory. Because what people used to do all the time was they would fake kernel objects in userland because it was so easy. So they would fake a kernel object, point it into userland, and then whenever kernel went to use that object, it would access the userland memory that you control. You can't do that anymore with SMAP. Because it'll crash when it tries to access that userland memory. Execution does the same thing, but it prevents you from using userland library gadgets in kernel ROP chains. That was the main thing of it. So these bits are in the control registers. So often, if you get code execution through an exploit, the first thing you do is you go into these registers and you edit them to disable those bits. You flip those bits because it's a lot easier to deal with stuff post-exploit if those are disabled, obviously. So what they're talking about here is trying to pin the sensitive bits of those registers to avoid them from getting disabled. Sorry, did you want to add anything on there, Z? Because I remember you were going to talk about something there.
No, you've been covering it fairly well. I was just going to go into that same explanation.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I mean, one thing I will say about this is, honestly, the problem with this is it's more of a post-exploit scenario. If you can modify the control registers, you've already broken kernel integrity. And if these bits are pinned at the kernel level, this won't really do anything. Because if you've broken kernel integrity, you're going to be able to break the integrity of whatever is enforcing this pinning. So this is something where it has to be enforced by a hypervisor if it's going to work. And they actually do mention that a little bit. They mention they'd like to see KVM enforce this too, which would protect guest kernels. So
yeah, I mean,
at kernel level, it's not really going to be that important. It's something that needs to be enforced by a hypervisor or a VM.
Yeah, there is kind of that issue, but at the same time, it is an extra step that you need to work through. Like when it's only done by the kernel, obviously there are going to be defeats, can race or whatever. But I mean, it is still that extra step.
Yeah. And I mean, something I will mention is like, there are points where the kernel will, of course, have to access userland memory. The kernel copies data from userland into kernel, and to do that, it will need to read from kernel userland memory. So it actually does that through special instructions that temporarily disable SMAP internally in the CPU, but they are specialized instructions. So this pinning shouldn't really be affected by that, or that shouldn't really be affected by the pinning. But yeah, it is something where if you don't have a hypervisor, this is, it adds an extra step, like Z said, but it's not unbeatable. It's not as, killing as the heap variable initialization stuff is. The last big thing really is the additional k-free sanity checking. Actually, it's not really that big. All they really do with it is they check the pointers they free to check if they're heap pointers at all, right? If they're not heap pointers, I guess it'll just ignore it.
Yeah,
so,
which is actually fairly reasonable. So like DL malloc or PT malloc and stuff in userland, introduced this a long time ago. Or well, obviously it wasn't checking for KMEM, membership or anything like the kernel one is, but introduced this concept quite a while ago just to validate pointers and stuff. minimal performance hit, but it actually prevents a fair number of attacks that abuse corrupted pointers in the heap, and that's a classic target for that sort of attack.
Yeah. And then they also mention, as a reminder, everyone should be building with config slab freelist hardening. So this config option, basically what it does is I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's basically trying to prevent double free stuff. It checks the free list before freeing to make sure it's not adding a pointer twice, trying to prevent poisoning the free list. It's not perfect. You can get around it, but
yeah, I'm not sure what the hardening is for that, so I can't comment. That's it. I do want to comment a little bit on our chat here. We had OP Vigar, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correct. It asked the question about using actually I'll just pull up the question here to go back to it. I'm new to this hacking thing. Can you use Ubuntu without Kali Linux to hack? And things kind of went from there. For the chat, listen, people are new sometimes. It is a very basic question that's been asked. That said, if he is new, give him some leeway with that. We don't want to, everybody starts somewhere. It is kind of a fair question. All you've heard is, hey, Kali Linux, download Kali Linux, which is absolutely something that happens. Everybody pushes Kali. I'm not a fan of it. I think, just get your own distro, install the tools you want, and know the tools that you're downloading. That said, try and be somewhat friendly with people here. I mean, although I do want to make mention that most of what we focus on is exploit development, whereas Kali's kind of for pen testers, and the difference being pen testers will kind of take a network, they'll look for existing vulnerabilities, existing misconfigurations, things they know about, and be like, hey, there's these issues, go fix them, whatever. But they'll use kind of these known vulnerabilities. They'll use these known exploits. Somebody else usually wrote the exploit, they're just using them. Whereas exploit development, which is kind of where we focus on actually creating those exploits that pen testers might use, actually writing 0 days. Malgod says make money off work others work. Yes and no. We want to do some more discussional videos at some point, and this is a topic I really want to talk about. But I just want to touch on that. So exploit development being more focused on like this, at least in our case, looking at the binary level, writing the exploits that pen testers might use. We spend a lot less time looking at how are we going to break the entire network and pivot around the network, get this or that or the other thing, and more just about we're breaking this application is going to be destroyed, or we're going to, compromise the Linux kernel, get code execution out of that. And from there, anybody can kind of take that as they want, as pen testers do. But we're kind of focused on more that side. So the question about Kali is quite basic. And the answer to that is no, you don't need to use Kali. You can learn security without that. But generally, we try and keep our chat a little bit lower level in one sense, or higher level in terms of the technical detail, depending on how your perspective.
Yeah.
But I did just want to call chat out, like, at least try and be pleasant with people here. If they really start trolling with their questions, feel free to do whatever, but I think that was a fair question. Sorry for that little distraction.
Yeah, it's all good. I just wanted to add on to that. Like, all Kali is, it's an OS with a bunch of pre-installed tools. That's it. Like, it's not really anything special. It's not a magic OS or anything.
Yeah, and that's why I'm more of a fan of telling people, if you're going to, just take Linux, install the tools yourself. That way you kind of know and decide what tools you're using. You know what's there. You know why it's there and what you're using it for. Rather than being like, well, what tool does Kali give me for this? What tool should you use for it? And do that research yourself because you learn. And that's the other thing. Doing research yourself is an important part of vulnerability research, exploit development, reverse, all of this. Doing your own research, and that frustrating research where you don't know what to search for is all part of this game. So, you OP Viger, yes, there about is Ubuntu better than Windows for hacking? If you Google that question, you're going to come up with a ton of opinions on it, and you can start to make your own opinion on whether or not it's better for hacking.
I mean, one thing worth mentioning is, Windows has WSL now if you're updated. So a lot of stuff you can do on Windows that you can do on Ubuntu as well through WSL. The only big thing that I think they're still lagging behind on is the ability to run 32-bit binaries. I don't think that's...
Yeah, and I don't think that's
that's still
coming
a thing,
to
yeah,
WSL.
probably not. But like that's something that's gonna fade as a need over time too. So
yeah.
And the other thing is you can just run a VM on Windows to do anything you can't do on Windows. So it's not a...
Yeah, I
not
mean,
a, you're
VMs
not
aren't
locked into
perfect
anything.
either, though. Anything
No.
that's like USB pass-throughs, things like that. If you're wanting to do something low-level network stuff, which Kali kind of has that that Windows is a little bit less effective with. And yeah, WSL2, is it out or coming out? But
It might be in the Windows Insider program, which is basically you become a beta tester, non-paid beta tester for Microsoft.
and you have to
Might be
sign in
that.
with your Windows or with your Microsoft Live account, which is why I've never bothered.
Yeah. So we'll cap off our mitigations section with a perspective on Unikernels. So this was a cool paper. I kind of liked it just because it kind of goes against the grain on the opinions on unikernels. Microkernels is what I meant. They talk about like unikernels and microkernels and stuff like that. So for those of you who don't know, the big benefit that microkernels provide over macro kernels is they're a lot smaller, obviously, given the name. So there's less attack surface to hit. So generally, when people talk about them, they talk about them only in a positive light, right? It can only bring benefits. What I liked about this paper is they talk about both sides. They talk about some of the negatives that come with microkernels as well. So the positives they talk about is like the attack surface reduction. They mention a few other lesser known things, like you don't really have shells to work with, so it forces attackers to make more complex attack payloads. And less or no system calls, so more memory knowledge is required. But what I really like was they talked about some of the negatives of it as well. And I'm just scrolling down to try to find it, but some of the biggest negative they mention is there's less entropy. So the ASLR, stack cookies, and anything else that relies on randomly generated values, it's less effective. They do mention that this can be mitigated. They say that Mirage OS actually succeeds in trying to mitigate this issue. It's at the bottom of page 3 where they start to talk about the entropy stuff, I think. But and then some of the other things they say are like there's no guard pages because there's no additional protection rings, and debugging is harder on microkernels because you have less support for it because you're trying to keep more out of the kernel that you can. So yeah, I just wanted to say, like, I really like this paper. It's pretty accessible. It's high level. It's not too technical. But it kind of takes like an even-handed approach, which I think is lacking a lot when talking about microkernels and stuff like that. Do you have any thoughts on that, Z?
No, I mean, I kind of agree with that. I mean, it kind of compares that, totally mentioned with unikernels, which is more the like it's in addition to the monolithic kernels, unikernels are more around like Docker, where it's a shared kernel.
Yeah.
Just kind of mention the difference there. Whereas microkernel will usually have like several kind of modules that end up being isolated. Also, classic example of I think a microkernel, or maybe not classic, but the Nintendo Switch uses a microkernel. That's about the only thing I can think of that actively right now is using a microkernel. Can you think of microkernels in?
Not much.
Anything else that's really being used?
I no, I don't think I can.
Yeah, no,
Not many.
The Switch is what really comes to mind to me for that.
Yeah.
Most people are going to be more familiar with the monolithic kernels, or as you said, macro kernel, which...
Yeah, I was trying to think of the word. I couldn't think of it, so I just said macro kernel.
I wasn't sure.
I was thinking of
the
monolithic
term.
kernel. Yeah, that's the proper term. Thank you. So some of the stuff actually is talked about. I think there's a CCC talk that's going to be talking about Mirage OS and some unikernels and stuff. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I thought that was worth mentioning. So, GitHub Security Lab.
Yeah, so GitHub has pushed out some really interesting stuff here. There's actually a few different things that came out. Kind of covering them more or less in their order here of what shipped. So basically, there's a GitHub conference, I think, GitHub Universe or whatever, where they have a few different changes here that they put out. So one is the GitHub Advisory Database. Pretty much what it sounds like. They have a database now of CV numbers, details, all of that. The really cool thing with this is they're exposing it through GraphQL. So you can use GraphQL to query for CVs to find information about whatever. About whatever's vulnerable to this stuff. I don't know. I haven't seen GraphQL being used like to expose this type of information, so I think it'll be useful in terms of just hey, I've got this application. What CVs are out there for it as like a really quick query. So I think this is a nice move. I'm not going to be using it like in the immediate future, but I could see this becoming quite useful to be able to query CVs like that. Because right now there's really just honestly I end up needing to use Google and like just specify like cite NVD and like the NVD site. I don't know. This will be a nice add-on there. The next thing
Nice
they
quality
kind of
of life, yeah.
Yeah, quality of life is probably the best way to describe that. Just a nice improvement there. Automated security updates now generally available. So all that is GitHub will kind of warn you when one of your dependencies has a vulnerability. What it'll do now is it'll also automate, if you opt in, a pull request that will update you to the newest non-vulnerable version. Or sorry,
That's
like
pretty
to the
cool, not gonna
closest
lie.
non-vulnerable version. So it's just, again, another easy way to get that update in, because obviously a big issue are, applications not updating their dependencies.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think that's going to be very useful for open source stuff. That's going to
Yeah.
be
Like, I
that's
think
going to
the
be a big
warning
thing.
itself has actually been super useful that they've had it there. So
Yeah.
I've got a project that I kind of just forgot about for a while, and then got an email like, "Hey, yeah, it's vulnerable." So push the quick update. Now it wasn't anything actually exploitable, but I'd still rather stay on top of it. They've also introduced the ability to request CVs, which I think is really nice. I'm actually going to open that one here.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on
Well,
that?
so basically all it is you can literally just click a button to request a new CV.
So is CV
When you have an issue, it'll submit the CV. It'll submit it to GitHub. GitHub being a what are they called?
I was
CV
gonna say,
authorized. They're one of the people that can issue CV numbers. I'll put it like that. GitHub can do that. So with this, you can just click a button. It'll take the submission. It'll shoot it to GitHub. GitHub can verify it and give you a CV number, making that really simple just to get that CV requested. Because for a lot of people, it's like, well, how do I request the CV? What's the process for that? And it is a bit of a pain. You have to figure out who's your CV numbering authority to actually report the issue to. Where do you go for this or that? Fill out the big form. GitHub's basically simplifying that. So more issues are just going to get that CV. It's going to be reported that there was an issue there in a now queryable fashion with the GraphQL thing.
okay, what I do wonder though is now that they've made it easier to request CVEs, if we're gonna start seeing potentially more CVEs that are kind of
Iffy.
shouldn't be CVEs.
We haven't had a episode where we talked about not a CV in a while, so
That
might
was
be
our
a good
first
thing.
episode. I think we did that, and we haven't done it since, man. We
We
gotta
did it
bring
a
it
bit
back.
on, I think, second, but
Yeah. So that is one concern. Is like, I know some people kind of treat CVE as a joke, just because if you phrase anything, you can phrase a lot of things. Like, if you frame it right, you can get a CVE for it, even if you shouldn't get one. And I'm worried that this is going to be another potential avenue for that to happen.
it
And we're just
definitely
going to get
will
waves
be.
of useless CVEs.
But at the same time, is it better to have things over-reported or under-reported? Given
I
the
think
amount of
it's
information there, as long as you get um the CVSS correct, like the actual is it critical, like setting its level correctly. As long as you get that all right, you can query by that. You can see if something's like severe or not. I think there's a benefit to having more open source projects getting on board with CVs, because that's the thing. A lot of projects just don't bother with CVs. Like they might have a security issue and nobody really reports it until they get big enough for it to really matter.
and
That's
that
kind
is another thing I wonder about as well, is like how many CVEs are going to go unfixed, just because I know a lot, like open source does have a bit of an issue with like, oh, that's a security issue, but there's no way you could exploit that in my app, so I don't care, I'm not going to fix it. You know what I mean? Like,
well, so with that, part of the thing with CV is, first of all, this has to be the maintainer that's submitting it. Like I can't go and just be like, oh yeah, here's request a CV for the issue. Like
okay.
this isn't like I can just go around creating issues and requesting CVs for it.
Okay.
This
That
is
was a bit unclear to me. Okay, that makes more sense.
the maintainers of the project can take an issue and request a CV for it.
Okay, that makes sense. I see. I was thinking that like you could request it as like as an option when creating an issue or something like that. It's
No, no,
like,
and that's the thing with CVs, they do have to be validated and confirmed uh by an appropriate party.
oh yeah,
So
but
like you can't just go and open it.
see. The other thing is though too is like depending on how much this feature is used, this might kind of overload the team at GitHub that's tasked with verifying these CVEs. So they might get lazy with verifying
Maybe,
them.
maybe not.
But
Well, I mean, the level of verification is just like, is this actually an issue? And there is kind of the level of the maintainers actually kind of going about requesting it, so that'll kind of act as a filter too.
okay, fair
That
point.
said, the most interesting thing we haven't even touched on or the thing I'm most excited about with what GitHub's kind of put out here is actually, before I touch on that, one more thing is that they've
Mhm.
also added their token scanning program. They've got a few different groups here: Go Cardless, HashiCorp, Postman, and Tencent Cloud. All kind of have joined GitHub in automatically scanning for their tokens within code being committed to GitHub. Then they'll get the alert like, "Hey, you just committed a token." They'll be able to easily invalidate that token or revoke the token and generate a new one. Because that is a big issue where people will just not really thinking too much about security. They'll maybe have like a config file that takes a token. They'll just commit that right into their repo.
We talked about that before. I
It's
remember
definitely
it.
happened. Yeah, I don't
Hmm.
remember what episode, but we've seen that issue before. Actually, I think we might have talked about a tool on GitHub. I think it was like Shigit or something.
I think you're right. I think there was a tool that tried to help in regards to that. I just can't
Yeah,
remember what it did.
it was this
Wow, you have a good
Shigit.
memory. What the hell?
Which will
Wow.
actually, maybe I shouldn't do that on stream. But it essentially watches for secrets being committed in real time. So this is basically similar to that, but GitHub doing it a little bit more responsibly than just posting it publicly. Anyway, now to the exciting part, which is the CodeQL for research. So CodeQL, or essentially CodeQL is a paid application. What it is it's kind of a static analysis ish tool. It's definitely static analysis that lets you kind of query your code, query your data to try and find vulnerabilities. Um, you can think that like there are things like abstract syntax tree, querying the syntax tree to find issues. Like I think Eclipse will expose a API for doing that. It's kind of like that, but more on steroids. And it's not like so many static analysis tools. And the big issue with them is they look for certain code patterns, but it's kind of opaque. They have certain patterns. They're able to detect it. They're able to do whatever, and that's all. You're able to configure a little bit, but that's all that's there. There's no real work, no real ability for you to look for issues that you want to look for, and that's where CodeQL kind of comes in as. So it's been out since 2016. It's been a paid application for that long, and the gist of it is being able to query code. So I'll pull up another page here that actually has a quick example of what one of these queries might look like. Down here, this is just looking for unsafe deserialization. So in addition to being able to kind of query how methods are called and passing through, this thing does taint analysis. It's looking at like your sink, your source for sink and source for data, for your IO, seeing how it travels through and finding it where it maybe runs through, deserialization. In terms of this query, I haven't gotten to play around with this. This is the other thing that I kind of want to stream looking at. So I'm kind of excited to see a solid system for doing this. And this has been kind of adopted by like several big names. Microsoft, Google, Intel, Mozilla, Uber, I think is using it. There's some big names kind of getting behind CodeQL. So what GitHub's doing is they're releasing this free for you to use on open source projects. I mean, I believe GitHub ended up acquiring the company that built this. I believe that's kind of where this is coming out of, but I could be wrong, so probably best not to quote me on that. But I don't know, I'm just really excited to see this type of tool coming out because it could be a real tool for researchers. A lot of times when we end up having, so as I mentioned, these static analysis tools that look for certain really fixed things and don't give the researcher the tools to kind of find their own issues. This is going the opposite route. This is just trying to give a very generic tool that then as a researcher, we can start using to find issues. And I don't have a link for. Mozilla's actually opened up a bounty where if you can write a CodeQL query that matches old vulnerabilities that they've had, that matches like the code pattern there, they'll pay out bounties for you to write CodeQL for past vulnerabilities. And I think they're also requiring now going forward, new vulnerability reports need a CodeQL that actually matches that vulnerability. I think that's what I remember from reading it. Unfortunately, I don't have the link up to take a look at what Mozilla was offering there. But like, there's some very serious adoption of CodeQL happening. It went from being paid product to it is still a paid product for closed source stuff. But like I said, I'm really excited by this because this looks like a really awesome tool that's going to be really useful for a researcher to find code patterns. It might not actually guarantee that there's a exploit.
I think what drew me to it was the bounty aspect of it. So they have a bounty at the top there. They have a bounties tab, which basically goes into, I think, CodeQL itself. If you encouraging people to write a CodeQL vulnerability that. Oh, okay, so is this what you were talking about, kind of like with the Mozilla thing, but this is GitHub's version?
Oh, maybe it was this that I was reading, actually.
Yeah, because this one talks about writing a CodeQL query, and if it finds some issues across multiple projects or anything like that, they could potentially pay for it up to $2,500. So, they do have a bounty up. So for anybody who's interested in looking at CodeQL and using that to try to find issues in open source software, not only is there like the fun aspect of it, but you can also get paid for it. So I think that's another like big thing with the CodeQL stuff. So
yeah, like I said, this is like there's some very serious adoption behind this. And I do actually have the Mozilla one open here.
So that was GitHub.
So
version,
they're accepting static analysis queries also, in terms of what Mozilla is doing to encourage CodeQL usage.
Yeah.
And that includes queries that match historical issues but do not find any new vulnerabilities are eligible.
Yeah, so hopefully it'd be cool if you could check that out on stream. I know you're you're still trying to figure out some stuff with that, but I'd be interested in it.
Yeah, no, I thought it would be interesting to do like just a stream learning and playing around with CodeQL a bit. Like, they have a tutorial and stuff. I thought, depending on how long the PHP thing takes, I might take a look at this, because I'm legitimately excited to look at this.
Cool. All right. So our next topic, we kind of lost the tweet at the last minute because of some drama that was going on around it. I do have an image, but because of the drama surrounding it, it probably wouldn't be a good idea to show it on stream. So, but basically what happened was Huawei introduced a new invite-only bug bounty program. So there were some photos taken of some of the slides. So it was an invite-only conference, and part of the drama surrounding it was also there was a no photos policy, so that's why the tweet was taken down. But yeah, they were offering up to €200,000 for critical severity security issues. And they had a little chart. So they had some of the payouts. So 200,000 was critical. It started to go down quite a bit from there. I think.
Yeah, 200,000 critical. Medium was 50. High was 100. And 1,000 for low. And they also had kind of those same payouts on a few different descriptions. So RC in a privileged application like zero-click exploit, that's your 200,000. Whereas local code execution, also privilege, was the 100,000. RC in a restricted process, zero-click, 50,000, so that's your medium. And then information disclosure is 1,000.
I think it was a bit unfair that they dirtied info leaks like that, because info leaks are pretty important. Like, I don't know. I think
but they always pay less than the RCs.
Oh, definitely, but 1,000.
1,000 is kind of low. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially compared to what they're paying on the RCs.
Yeah. So I mean, how this works apparently, according to the tweets before they were taken down, was the people who attended that conference basically got like invite tokens that they could give to researchers they knew that were interested in the bounty program. So it's definitely not open. You probably got to have some contacts that are notable security people who attended that conference. So it's not open to everyone, but it seems like a pretty good bounty program. Like, bounties paying up to €200,000 as well, mind you. Like, I don't know the conversion to US dollars, but euro is worth more than US, right? Last I checked. So,
yep.
Like, those payouts are pretty high. Granted, it is Huawei. I know we've talked about them before. There's some controversy around their connections with China and stuff like that. But, if you don't care about that and are interested in bounties, and, you have contacts and get you into that might be interesting for you. Huawei seems to be putting out a lot of money for that stuff.
Well, but I suppose if you have the contacts, you're probably already aware of it too.
Oh, probably. But we thought we should bring it up too, just in case. So the next thing is Interpol planning to condemn encryption spread citing predators. So
yeah,
the encryption phobia is back. I thought this book was closed a couple years ago. I guess it's not. It's resurfaced.
No, it's still coming up. So this is actually, I guess, while it's Interpol, I believe the actual report may have been pushed by the FBI. At least that's what a different news report mentioned from Ars Technica.
Okay.
Mentioned that it was authored by officials at the FBI for one of the Interpol meetings of like a specialist group. And essentially their gist is the usual, encryption makes it harder for them to track pedos. Because this was specifically the 37th meeting of Interpol Specialist Group on Crimes Against Children. So yeah, it protects, or strong encryption protects child sex predators, I guess is what we've got in this report.
Problem is, it also protects billions of other people that aren't child predators. So that's,
It does, and weakening encryption. I mean, we probably don't need to spend a lot of time on this one. Like, I feel like there's a pretty solid consensus within the security community that weakening encryption is a bad idea and criminals are going to use it anyhow.
Yeah,
even if they were to ban it. But I
yeah,
did want to mention, like, yes, okay, encryption does make things more difficult for law enforcement. That isn't a lie. It makes things more difficult. So if we're talking about terrorism or whatever, it makes things more difficult, but that's the whole point of the checks and balances that are in place for law enforcement, is to make things more difficult. That's why they need to get a warrant. Not because it's easier for them to get a warrant, because that protects everybody. And I just can't get behind throwing away some of those rights or some of those protections.
yeah. I mean, it's, to use kind of a phrase that's said a lot, it's kind of a slippery slope. One thing I did want to say is, like, there's actually a really excellent video. I'm trying to find it. It's by a guy named CGP Grey, and his channel's really awesome. Like, I encourage everyone to check it out. Actually, I just found the video. Yes, I was worried I wasn't going to be able to find it, but there's a really good video by CGP Grey on this issue that I think sums it up pretty well. Let me just I'll bring it up on stream just so that we have the link. But
Hello,
the
Internet.
video
We need
title
to
is
talk about
"Should
locks,
all
the
keys
physical
or should
and
all
the
locks have
digital.
keys?
In the
Phones,
physical,
castles, encryption, and you." So I think this was around the time when there was that big incident where Apple refused to unlock the phone for the FBI for that alleged terrorist or whatever it was. So, like, that was obviously a huge issue that sparked this discussion, and that was the couple years ago thing that it just resurfaced. But one line I remember from the video that's very relevant here is, like, you can't make encryption suck only for the bad guys. That's not how encryption works. If you put a flaw in there to allow law enforcement to get in, anybody's going to be able to use that to get in. And that's the problem with it. Unfortunately, it will prevent law enforcement from pursuing people who are
It'll
who are doing
prevent them
bad
from
things.
going for criminals, yeah, but
That's
there's
kind
the
of something
public
that,
benefit of crypto.
yeah, and that can't really be ignored.
And
So.
I think the reality is kind of the cat's out of the bag. We've already got strong crypto. It's already been implemented.
hello, Internet. We need to talk about locks.
Sorry, I have to keep closing when you open that link.
Oh, it autoplays.
autoplays.
I didn't think about that. Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, we have to lost my train of thought. Yeah, so the cat's kind of out of the bag when it comes to crypto. Criminals are going to be able to keep using it even if we get rid of it for the public. Although, to be fair, like, making it illegal to use then means they don't need to prove any of the content. They can just be like, well, you use crypto, therefore you're bad. But oh no, I've already kind of touched on kind of giving up those rights. It does. There's the public good.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about a pretty scary article. This one shook me a little bit.
We talked about these guys already.
Did we? When?
Yeah, quite a while back when they were first arrested. Because they were arrested quite a while
really?
back. Yeah.
I don't remember that at all, dude. Okay. Do you remember a little bit about what we talked about then? Because
I don't remember our discussion then. I know we've talked about these guys because basically they did
this happened on September 11th, so it would have been fairly recently, right, that we talked about this.
Yeah, I think it was on one of our first episodes back.
Huh, okay.
Or maybe we didn't, actually, because that is September 11th, although I don't think news came. Either way,
yeah, we'll cover it again, just because I don't remember covering that, so I think it'd be good to do a bit of an overview.
Cover it again.
just in case, So, basically what happened was there was these two pentesters that were hired apparently by the court commission, the state court administration, to see, like, if they could break in and how they.
It was a physical. Well, it was a penetration test.
Pen
it
test.
included social engineering and physical aspects.
Yeah. So there was a list of things they were allowed to do, right? They were allowed to impersonate staff or contractors. They could provide false pretenses. They could tailgate employees into the facility, and they could access restricted areas. But there were some things that they weren't allowed to do, which was alarm subversion. They weren't allowed to disable the alarm. They couldn't force open doors, and accessing environments that require protective equipment. The first two seem to be kind of the keys to the story because they were caught by sheriffs that were like watching the CCTV feeds, and
Well, the alarm went off, and then the sheriffs monitored the CCTV.
yeah,
They tripped the alarm.
and then the sheriffs basically arrested them because they used like a physical shim to keep the door open, I think, from earlier on, and they tried to claim that was forcing the door open. And then the sheriff also claimed he saw them trying to disable the alarm or something like that, which would violate that term of the pen test terms. So, yeah, they were arrested, and then they had to post apparently like $50,000 bail each.
Posting bail. So the big thing here is they were arrested, and like charges weren't dropped, even though they were authorized pen testers. That's kind of the big deal here, just so we kind of get what this is about out of the way. These two Coalfire employees went in, did the pen test, got caught, and the police basically ignored their, what's generally called your get out of jail free card, which kind of states who you're there. Apparently, their contact wasn't answering the call, but they believe they didn't have authorization. It happened on September 11th. Even though the men kind of came out, it is a little bit concerning because, pen testers obviously act with, I think the legal term's mens rea or something, like you have to show the intent for criminal behavior, and obviously they believe they're acting as part of their job. So there's a ton of questions about whether or not what they did or was allowed or not, like the force open doors. I usually see that as like, you're literally not allowed to kick down doors.
Yeah, like cause damage. That's what I would think it would be for.
Yeah,
which
that's
makes
forcing
sense.
open, whereas picking locks could also be considered forcing open a door. That's forcing open a lock, though. It is slightly different.
You're not damaging anything doing it. I think that's an important distinction.
Lock picking can damage, actually, but that's besides the point.
Okay.
But what I think is actually more important here, though, is even with those questions, these guys acted believing they were allowed to be there, and everything was okay. They didn't know they were committing any crime. So the prosecutor on this has actually charged them with trespassing. Charged them with lesser charges that don't require that mens rea. Again, I might be wrong. I'm not a legal expert, but basically he's dropped the charges a little bit so he doesn't need to prove that they actually had the intent to perform any criminal actions. Which is absolutely an asshole move. Like this kind of comes down to whether or not the state actually could authorize the testing on the county property. And that's the turf wars between the state and the county. The county saying that the state wasn't even authorized to do this, and these two men are just caught in the middle of it, doing what they thought was a legal pen test, and an overzealous prosecutor who wants to make an example out of them, even though the issue's with the state, not with these guys. And to be clear, like, this is literal, or this can very much be a career ruining thing, because odds are, they're doing this for the state. I'm going to assume they have security clearances. I don't know for sure, but even having an arrest can impact your security clearance. Not a charge, just an arrest.
And then even if you don't need a security clearance, any future jobs will be wary to hire you because of your lack of the ability to get a security clearance if you need one. So it's like
that's a bit less. I mean, if you don't need it, you don't need it, and they don't necessarily look at that. But an arrest will come up on background searches.
Yeah,
like just an arrest can be damaging too. Maybe it won't ruin their careers, but like it'll be a substantial hurdle, especially if they do have clearances, and especially if this goes through to them actually being charged and found guilty.
What I was thinking of was like if you have like a pen testing firm who takes on jobs as time goes on, and then eventually they get issued a government contract, you'll be barred from participating in that job if you're not able to get a security clearance, obviously, right? Like that's where I was thinking of with that. But I don't know, man. Like, yeah, this story seemed really fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, as pen testers, though, like they believe they were doing their job. Like I've mentioned, there are some questions about, which is fair. There are some questions about the scope. But ultimately, these guys they believe they were simply doing their job. And the real issue is more of a civil issue between the state and the county. It's not the criminal action of these guys. So the fact that the prosecutor dropped this down to a couple charges that doesn't require as much evidence, frankly, it ticks me off quite a bit.
Yeah, that really sucks, dude. But yeah, we'll just have to keep a monitor on it to see if that changes.
Yeah, see
Apparently,
how the case actually turns out.
Yeah, I do want to add on there. I remember looking at the conclusion, or maybe it was in the comments, but apparently that sheriff that arrested them is getting quite a bit of hate mail from all around the world, man, even from Europe. People are making their frustrations known.
I mean, it's kind of like this whole article really, I think, how a turf war and a botched contract landed two pentesters in Iowa jail. It's a turf war. Those two guys are not, or should not be, the focus of it.
Yeah, sucks for them.
It's like they're not the ones at fault here. They really shouldn't be facing criminal charges or criminal trespassing.
Yeah, I'll just address a quick question in chat. Any updates on Windows Rain? No, I mean, obviously, neither me or Z work on Check Rain or anything like that. I know they're working on Windows support, but it's tough, man. So I would be surprised if you see it before a month or two. I know they're working on it, but yeah, it's just something that we'll cover it when it does happen, because I think that's gonna be at least shout it out. Maybe a couple minutes. We won't go into a full discussion, but yeah, not at the moment. There's no updates on that. You'd have to keep up to date with the Apple people, or rather the iOS hacking people. All right. So the Intel Management Unit. So this talks about exploiting IME. So this is mainly just a shout out I wanted to give out. I don't want to go into a full discussion on this because IME is pretty complicated. It's pretty low level. But I thought it was cool because the exploit, it's a multi-stage exploit. They've got a buffer overflow and a stack cookie bypass to get code execution. And like I said, IME is really low level. So if you're interested in low level, I think you should give these a read, especially if you were ever thinking about looking into IME. That being said, though, I haven't read it through its entirety. I don't think you have either, Z. So it's we can't talk too much about it. It's just more of a shout out. Check it out kind of thing.
Yeah, I can't really add anything on it. I've definitely been seeing this linked around a bit, but with this part 1 and there's a part 2 that's out.
Yeah, did you? Oh no, you didn't open that up. Okay, but yeah, just a quick shout out. The last thing that was kind of a last minute addition is the 36C3, so the Chaos Communication Conference FAR plan was actually put out. So I'm pretty sure that these talks were all accepted in the CFP, and then this page is just trying to get people to select the talks that they would like to see so that they don't end up overlapping. Because in CCC, I'm pretty sure it's like DEF CON, you have multiple tracks, so you have multiple talks happening at the same time, so you don't want the most popular talks happening at the same time and make people have to choose between two talks they really want to see. So I think that's what they're talking about here. So they say help us to reduce conflicts of scheduling. Click on the talks you really want to watch and press submit. So CCC, those of you that don't know, this conference is really cool. Often the talks at this conference, they're put out live. You can watch them live even if you're not at the conference, which I think CCC is the only conference that does that. So that's pretty awesome in itself. But the talks are usually really, really good, especially the security talks. And
yeah,
I mentioned
they usually
earlier,
have a good variety. Like, honestly, any conference that I've attended, just the people at CCC are easily. So I presented at CCC a few years back. It was my from all of the conferences that I've been to, CCC is easily my favorite. I'm kind of disappointed I haven't been able to go back, but just good kind of people all around for it. I had good questions being asked. good topics. Like Spectre mentioned, the streaming and stuff. So like definitely check it out because they do stream all of these, as you said, live. Obviously, it takes place over in Germany, so the time zone, if you're like us over in more North American time zones, a bit of a stretch for those times, but it's worth it. I think they're always good talks. They always have a good mix of stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, some of the talks in here actually overlap with some of the stuff we've talked about in this episode and previous episodes of the podcast. So you have like the zombie load attack, the KTRW, the journey to build a debuggable iPhone. We talked about that before as well. Like there's a lot of really cool stuff in here. Not a lot of, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of console stuff this year. There was one with the 3DS, but I think that was it. Hacking Sony PlayStation Blu-ray drives, but that's more of like, yeah, I guess that's still a console.
It's still console, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of really cool talks. So, especially if you're planning on going to CCC, I'd recommend going to this page and picking the talks you'd want to see. That way you don't have to invent some new technology to split yourself into two people at once.
Or you just watch one stream on your phone while you're sitting in the room for another.
That might be a bit easier, yeah. But yeah, I'm still hoping to go to CCC this year. I haven't booked the flight yet. I'm still trying to figure out some stupid things that are going on, but yeah, I'm hoping to go to CCC. So I've already put through my selection, but anybody else who's going or anything like that, or if you're just gonna end up watching it, help them out, submit that selection, and you can get a bit of an overview of the kind of talks that'll be there at CCC. But yeah, that's our last topic.
Looks like an interesting selection there for this year.
Yeah. I will say one thing I wish was a little bit smaller was the ethics, society, and politics section. I think they have a little bit too many slots.
I don't know. I mean, that's always been a big part of like CCC, though.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, I think that's everything on that. That's all the topics we have today. So yeah, that concludes topics. Hopefully Z will be able to get back to doing some streaming this week. I don't think his ISP is going to screw him over 2 weeks in a row. I think
hopefully
that'd be
not.
hopefully that'd be a little bit ridiculous. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But yeah, so we should still be doing the stream on Friday night at 8 or 9 p.m. Eastern. We're not sure. There might be a stream on Wednesday night as well, but we're not entirely sure yet. Still got to work out some details on that. But we'll let you guys know. Just follow us on Twitter. Whenever we do a stream, it's always going to be put out there. We also have a Discord that will have alerts on as well. So
yeah, and links are all down in the description. As for the links for basically everything we've talked about, they always go down in the description over to YouTube tomorrow.
Yeah, that's audio. A good point. Just to remind you guys that we do have to wait 24 hours before we put any of the VODs or anything up. So try to catch us live if you can. But yeah, we'll see you guys next week on the next podcast.